Hey guys, how's it going? This is CRP speaking to you live on Monday, August 9th, 2021. And for those of you who have a historical memory, you'll note that August 9th was the day Richard Nixon resigned as president in 1974. So it's what, 47 years since that date. And I personally remember it very well. So yeah, it's 47 years since that day. And here we are. We're going to be discussing why liberalism will always fail in a multicultural society. And I'm seeing the plus one, so everybody can hear me and see me properly, I take it. So, yay, team. I'm not screwing up. And I'm not wearing a hat today because it's goddamn hot. It is hot, hot, hot. And I've got the windows open and I've got a fan running. So, if you hear some noise from outside or something like that, you're going to have to forgive me because it's just goddamn hot here in Ukraine. Oh, yeah, and on Sunday morning, I had a get together here in Kharkov in Ukraine, and it went very well. I got like something like 15, almost 20 people showed up, which was really a surprise. I didn't expect even one person to show up. In fact, I showed up there to the location with a book in case nobody else showed up and I'd have something to read while I had my breakfast. But fortunately, there were a lot of very nice people who showed up, and it was a real pleasure. And yeah, and then I was supposed to do the Sunday webinar right after that. I had it all scheduled and whatnot. But unfortunately, something happened involving the kids. I'm not going to go into it, but it not serious, but it couldn't be helped, and I had to push it. And I'm so sorry about that. It wasn't certainly my intention, and I'm really looking forward to this broadcast. So without further ado, let me get started. Okay, I'm going to close out my my face because you guys don't need to see my ugly mug. And Abilene. Who's saying Abilene? I'm in Abilene. Yeah, Abilene is a great town, actually. Anyway, yeah, why liberalism will always fail in a multicultural society. I said I was going to do this webinar on Wednesday when I did my video, Why CRT, Why Now? CRT, for those of you who don't know, is critical race theory. Now, this presentation, I'm going to explain a key issue, which is liberalism, which is the dominant political ideology of the Western democracies. It's actually not implemented in all the Western democracies, as I'll discuss briefly, but for the most part, it's in the dominant Western democracies. It is decaying, it is collapsing, and this is inevitable. Because everything rises, everything flourishes, and then everything decays. It's just the way of life. And so don't feel sad that it's ending. Understand why it's ending, and understand that while it was flourishing, it was a wonderful thing. And now with the COVID lockdowns and the hysteria, the totalitarianism that is arising in the West, I mean, you see it in Australia. I mean, grotesque totalitarianism, all in the name of protecting people and safety and whatnot. Well, you know, the liberal project is winding down. And we'll look back on it and we will enter a period of I think a kind of neo-aristocracy that is going to be fairly insecure in its position and therefore very totalitarian. And we are not going to be seeing the technological advances that we have seen before. Those days are over. Okay. I'm becoming more and more convinced that, you know, things are just going to slowly keep on decaying. And I don't think it's going to be like the Roman Empire that took 400 years to collapse. I think that the collapse is going to be a lot faster. And so, yeah, without further ado, let me get into the topic. Yeah, New Zealand as well. Yeah, they're all going totalitarian. Anyway, why liberalism will always fail in a multicultural society? Very simple. See, you got to understand what liberalism is. Liberalism is a political ideology, and it posits that all men are created equal. Therefore, all men have equal rights. Government is by consent of the governed. That is, those people, those citizens, they give consent to the government, to the state, to act in the name of the people. It's not that the state acts unilaterally and the people are the slaves of the state. No, the state is supposed to be a slave of the people. Now, liberalism, and this is a key issue that you have to understand. Liberalism has always been established in poor regions and nations. We often forget this fact. especially because a lot of notions of liberalism seem to have originated in Great Britain. That seemed to be a very successful country. But as I'll get to in just a moment, Great Britain is actually the exception. And it's the exception. And once you start to look at Great Britain a little bit more closely, you realize that it's not a really liberal society. Other countries like the United States, like the Netherlands, like post-war Germany, like post-war France to a lesser extent, like post-war Spain and Portugal and Latin America. These countries are liberal democracies. All men are created equal. That's the key component. Okay. Now, what's the net effect of liberalism? Why is liberalism such a great idea? Well, because you see, in every other society in history, you have had different kinds of aristocracies. That is, certain groups of people are arbitrarily elevated over other groups of people. Think of the caste system in India. You have the untouchables that are at the very bottom and the Brahmins who are at the very top. Why is this so? It's arbitrary. It's just, you happen to be born a Brahmin or happen to be born an untouchable. And there you go. And that's your social class, and that's that. Most aristocracies throughout history, they are like that. They are arbitrary. Very few societies have been meritocratic. And in fact, the most successful countries or empires were meritocratic. Think of the Mongol Empire. Think of the American Empire. Those were meritocracies. And it's no accident that both the American Empire and the Mongol Empire were the largest empires in human history. And so you have to realize that aristocracies are the natural state of affairs. Egalitarianism, that is, that all men are created equal, that's the exception. And the exception that those countries that implemented egalitarianism became wildly successful, and in their success, they inevitably became aristocratic again, which happened with the Mongol Empire, which is happening now with the American Empire, and that's the decay. And that's the decay of these great empires. And so the ideology of the Mongols was simply war. Just go out there, kill stuff, and get as much grassland for your horses as possible. That was their whole plan. Okay, the Mongols were very simple. They didn't care about anything except having enough grassland for their horses. That's all they wanted. Okay, and they were willing to conquer the whole goddamn world and set fire to every city on the planet, so long as they were able to achieve this goal. Okay, I mean, they really were, such a fabulous empire. They really were going for small bananas. But anyway, the American Empire, it had liberalism. Liberalism was invented in Great Britain, but it found expression, political expression, with the American Constitution of 1789. Because the American Constitution of 1789, by way of its system of checks and balances, was able to rein in the potential pitfalls of an egalitarian society. Because when you have an aristocratic political system, you have a king who rules. Why? Because he's the king. And it's just posited. It's just, accepted. He's the king, ergo he rules. In an egalitarian society, he rules. But why does he rule? Because he won an election? But what if I'm stronger? Why don't I just overthrow him? You see? And so you can quickly collapse into the state of nature. And so that's why liberalism, or the great genius of the American founding fathers, specifically of James Madison, but also the other writers of the Federalist Papers, they figured out a system whereby through checks and balances, you could have a leader who would not be despotic. And that's the key issue. See? And that is why the American experiment worked. It worked very well. And remember, America in 1789 was relatively poor. It exported raw materials and precious few finished goods, if any, quite frankly. It was the other countries, Great Britain and the countries in the continent, the European continent, that were creating exportable goods that had burgeoning, blossoming economies. The United States in 1789 was a backwater. They implemented liberalism. Now, because of the implementation of liberalism, the net effect, it ended aristocracy, because the United States after 1789 had no aristocracy, and replaced it by a democracy. Now, if all people are created equal, what you're going to get is extreme social mobility. You can be born poor, but by dint of your own effort, you can rise in society. That's the promise of liberalism. the antithesis of an aristocracy. Because in an aristocracy, if you're born, into a lower class or into an upper class, it doesn't matter if you're rich or poor. That's not what an aristocracy is. A plutocracy is a kind of aristocracy. A plutocracy is an aristocracy of the wealthy. But, a plutocracy is an aristocracy, but not all aristocracies are plutocracies. There are lots of aristocracies where the upper classes didn't have a pot to piss in. Yeah. But that's not the issue. The issue is the aristocrat. He is born into a specific class, be it high or low or middling, and he can't move. And therefore, he has no incentive to change or to improve his situation. And think of it. If you are born, a tradesman in France in the 18th century, in 1760, say, you're born a tradesman in France, and so are you going to try to strive for more? No. And you might work harder so you can earn a few more pennies so that you can buy a few more things and knickknacks and whatnot. But you're never going to be of the upper classes now, will you? Of course not, because you're a tradesman. Aristocracies are fixed, socially fixed. But in a liberal society, in egalitarian society, where all men are created equal, always remember that term, egalitarianism. When I say egalitarianism, for purposes of this conversation, I mean that all men are created equal. Now, in an egalitarian society, you can be born a tradesman, the son of a tradesman, but by dint of effort, you can rise up. You can become president of the United States. See? And that was the great myth of America, that no matter how humble you might happen to be, you could rise up. Abraham Lincoln was a poor boy from Kentucky, and he rose to be president. That kind of myth is exceedingly important in liberal societies, because it gives the motivation to the more capable people who were perhaps born in lower classes to rise up. And you see, when somebody puts all of their effort into rising, not only do they rise, but they create more for the society as a whole. In an aristocracy, you don't get that. Excuse me. And so, therefore, in an aristocracy, nobody's really trying to rise up because they know that they can't. And so they're not really putting in their best efforts. But in an egalitarian society, since you can rise, the more capable people tend to rise. And in their rise and their efforts to better themselves, they lift up the whole society. And so liberalism, the net effect of it is it creates extreme social mobility to the benefit of the collective as a whole. The collective being the society, the nation, the region, doesn't matter. Now, because of this extreme social mobility, you are going to have explosive economic growth and progress in a liberal society. A liberal society is going to be incredibly good for economic growth because since there are no categories, because since we're all equal, everybody's striving for more. And therefore, the whole boat rises. Now, the great thorn of liberalism, and this is a term I'm going to use throughout this essay, the great thorn. And whenever I say this term, think of it as this definition. The great thorn of liberalism is the disparate outcomes among different racial groups. This is obvious, and it doesn't need defending. And a lot of people twist themselves into fucking pretzels in order to avoid facing this fact. And the fact is that different ethnic groups have different outcomes on average. It doesn't mean that every individual of any particular group is going to be better than or less than some other, than every other individual of every other group. No. See, they're bell curves, and these bell curves overlap inevitably. And so to claim that just because one group on average performs better does not mean that every member of that ethnic group is going to perform better than every member of the other ethnic group. But it's a fact, okay? We have to face it. And it's very difficult because it goes against the foundational myth of liberalism. Because you see, liberalism was created in ethnically homogenous regions or societies. And that's the thing. That's the key issue. See? Now, there are two camps insofar as the great thorn of liberalism, okay, apart from the issue of denial. I mean, most people who are liberals deny this reality. They cannot accept it. They cannot face it. And if you mention it, you're a racist, okay? And frankly, that's why I'm doing this webinar on Patreon, because I know that you guys know that I'm not a racist. I could give a shit about people's race. I don't care. But I have to look at reality as it actually is. And this should not be controversial. I mean, like, for instance, to give a very simple example that no one in his right mind is going to argue with. People in Vietnam, on average, are shorter than people in the Netherlands. Said another way, ethnically Vietnamese people are on average shorter than ethnically Dutch people. This is a fact. This is indisputed. I mean, height is an objective measure, okay? You know, a person who's 1 meter 80 is 1 meter 80 everywhere in the world. It's not like in some regions 1 meter 80 is really like 6 feet, and another place 1 meter 80 is only 5. No, it doesn't work that way. 1 meter 80 is an objective standard. Height is an objective standard, and on average, Dutch people are taller than Vietnamese people. Does that mean that every Vietnamese person is shorter than every Dutch person? No, not at all. Of course not. There are going to be Vietnamese people who are going to be taller than a few Dutch people. And I would not be, or how can I put it? It is possible, perfectly possible, that there is a Vietnamese person who is taller than every Dutch person. This is perfectly possible. Or give another example. People in Holland today, on average, are taller than people in the United States in the 1930s. This is objectively true. If you look at the average height of people in the United States, black and white, every single race in the United States, you just average all of their heights. People in Holland today are on average taller than people in all people in the United States during the 1930s. But the tallest man who ever lived, his name is slipping my mind right now, but you've seen pictures of him. The poor fellow who had like a thyroid issue, and he grew and grew and grew until eventually his growing killed him at a very young age, a tragically young age, as I understand it. But this gentleman grew up to something like 9 feet tall or something absurd like that. Yeah, that man was taller than every single Dutch person today. Yeah, you know, even though on average, every single Dutch person, even though on average, Dutch people are taller than American people, the average American in the 1930s. There was this one American who's taller than everybody else. See, exceptions exist. I know I'm going on and on about this issue, but I really want to armor myself against any allegation of racism, because this is a very delicate topic. And I'm not interested in people thinking that I'm racist or saying something racist when I'm not. That's not my intention. My intention is to explain why liberalism, our dominant political ideology, is collapsing now. It's important to understand it. And you have to look at this thorn, the great thorn of liberalism. Now, there are two camps who explain away these disparate outcomes, who explain away the great thorn of liberalism. There are race realists. They claim that different races have different average abilities, which I believe is true. Hence, they argue that disparate outcomes among different ethnic groups makes complete scientific sense, which I also agree. However, race realists tend to focus obsessively on IQ, which I think is a mistake, because I think that the different outcomes among different ethnic groups are not just IQ based. Race realists focus obsessively on IQ, but they curiously avoid the issue of ocean. Ocean is the big 5 psychological traits of openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Now, these are the standard measures of people's, people's personality. Okay, this is that's why we have the acronym OCEAN. Okay, and by the way, I'm a quick parentheses. Give me a +1 if you can hear me properly, and audio and video are copacetic, please. Thanks. Anyway, race realists, they ignore ocean, and they also ignore the issue of impulse control, which I think I've noticed also that the psychologists in general also avoid that issue of impulse control, which I think is key issue of impulse control, because I have noticed that impulse control is really what separates people of higher social class today from the lower social classes. And I'm not talking between races, I'm talking within races. In my own case, I noticed that people of higher classes have far greater impulse control, and they have been educated to have far more impulse control. Impulse control is actually something that's fairly easy to teach someone, especially to teach someone young. And impulse control has a great benefit to them long term. And so my thinking is that it's not just IQ, it's openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism that tends to be that different ethnic groups tend to have in different amounts on average, and also the issue of impulse control. And some of these 6 items, the 5 of ocean plus impulse control, they can be tweaked and improved. Certainly impulse control. And I actually experimented with my children, you know. I've taught them that, here's one cookie. You can have one cookie or ignore the cookie for 10 minutes and I'll give you 2 cookies. And they become past masters at it. I mean, they know how to do it because I've taught them. And of course, this experiment is harmless to them. Okay, I'm not like freaking Joseph Mengele doing some crazy ass experiments on my own kids. Okay, but yeah, that kind of experiment, that kind of fomenting of impulse control, that's something that people with more education and more access to the upper strata of society realize is incredibly important, and they foment it in their children. A lot of times they foment it without even realizing it. How many times have you noticed people who are upper middle class, and they'll go to a restaurant and they'll insist that their kid, put the napkin on your lap, sit up straight, don't put your elbows on the table, all these little things, right? And because of these little things, well, all of them, what are they? They are cues to control impulses, because the natural impulse for the kid is just to slouch at the table, one elbow on the table and holding up his head while shoveling food into his mouth, and chewing with his mouth open. That's perfectly natural, because that's how children like to behave, because they're children. And so the adults, they teach them these little cues of impulse control. And so anyway, my objection to race realists is that they focus obsessively on IQ. And my thinking is that it's just a whole host of different attitudes, social attitudes, and these 5 psychological traits, which, by the way, these 5 psychological traits, they are on average very different between men and women. Okay. So the idea that they are not different between races is absurd, because first of all, they are different between races. And second, to posit that they're not is just, fooling yourself. Okay. So anyway, the race realists, that's one camp that tries to explain the disparate outcomes among the different racial groups. The other group are the critical race theorists, or also the equity theorists, wokesters, call them what you will. They're all pretty much the same shit. They're fucking communists. Okay. Now, they claim that the liberal system is racist because of the disparate outcomes. Notice, it's not that they say that, that what you call it. I mean, they basically say that disparate outcomes by definition means that the system is racist. It's the only explanation. Only racism, according to them, of course, can account for the disparate outcomes among the different ethnic groups. They will dismiss any attempt to bring in ocean, IQ, or impulse control. They will vehemently dismiss it, and they will call you a racist. Okay. So, I mean, if you go into that area of actually arguing with the critical race theorist, know that you're going to be called a racist. And in our contemporary culture, being called a racist is like the worst thing imaginable. Okay. And so you get called a racist, you can get into a lot of trouble. It can hurt you. So arguing in good faith with the critical race theorist is a waste of time, because you're not going to get anything out of it. You're not going to convince them, and they're going to smear you in a way that you might not be able to clean up, and which might affect you in a way that you can't recover from. So do you really want to get involved with them and argue these points? My suggestion is that you don't, but you're a big boy. You do you, but my thinking is don't do it. Anyway, the net effect of liberalism, as I explained, is explosive economic growth. The great thorn is that disparate outcomes emerge among the different racial groups. But how does this happen? See? I mean, how is it that a liberalism arises in a poor, homogenous zone, region, nation, and then this great thorn arises? Well, you see, liberalism is, how can I put it, a victim of its own success. That's basically a problem, and I'll explain why. See, in the United States from 1789 to 1964, the first 80 years, from 1789 to 1865, the country was ethnically homogenous, and it was ethnically homogenous by regions with relatively little contact with one another. See, the different states, Tennessee, Pennsylvania, Vermont, and what have you, each of these states, they tended to be ethnically homogenous, but there was relatively little contact between them. Because you have to understand, in those 80 years before the Civil War, see, there wasn't the technology or the ability to casually travel from one place to the next. I mean, we think nothing of going 100 miles from one city to the next in a car, and we bitch about it. We say, oh man, I got to be on the car for like 2 hours to go from here to there. 100 miles at the beginning of the 19th century, that was like a couple of weeks at least. Okay. I mean, at least a couple of weeks. So the notion of casually traveling great distances was absurd. It was just impossible. And so because of it, you had all of these different regions that were ethnically homogenous. And what of course happened is that, see, there was a slow gradation between regions in terms of ethnicities, in terms of cultural background. And so they were all separate. And since they were all separate, but they were ethnically homogenous, it worked like a charm, no problem. You see? Now, from 1866, after the Civil War, until 1948, that's when American apartheid happened. Because, of course, before 1866, the black population were politically separate from the white population because they were slaves. And, you don't like it and it bothers you. Yeah, but they were slaves. They were slaves, and therefore they didn't have any political input. And in the North, they might have been free, but they were insignificant because they were politically disorganized. Because, quite frankly, the other people were racist against them. Yeah, which made sense because most of the people living in the northern states in the United States, they came from ethnically homogenous regions. Now, you might be thinking, well, what about New York City? Yeah, New York City was the way outlier. In 1860, something like 85% of the population lived in rural areas. Very few people lived in the cities relative to the rest of the population. New York City had sure, a bunch of different ethnicities, Asians, Africans, African Americans, Jews, Italians, this, that, the other. Yeah, sure, all these people, like a big smorgasbord of people just in New York City. And they were a minority compared to the rest of the country. The rest of the country was rural because this is the fucking 19th century, okay? Okay, so before the end of the Civil War, blacks were separate because they were slaves, and so they were politically insignificant. And I don't mean this to disrespect anybody. I'm just saying what they were. They didn't count politically because they couldn't vote, the majority of blacks in the United States, because they were slaves. After 1866, the United States essentially created an American apartheid, okay? Now, there are some people on Patreon who criticize me because they said that segregation was not so wonderful as I painted out to be. I didn't paint it out to be wonderful at all. I'm saying what it was. It was two societies living geographically in the same country. And there were certain areas of overlap. And somebody said, I think the same person said that I belittled the fact that so much of the segregation was about humiliation and whatnot. That's actually not true. Those people who say that all the segregation was about humiliating black people, no, that wasn't. That wasn't the intention, at any rate. It was simply that the white people wanted to be apart from the black people, and the black people wanted to be apart from the white people too. It was both ways. And so to claim that the black people wanted to integrate and be part of the white society. That's a lie. They didn't want to be a part of black society, and the black upper classes didn't want to either, because they wanted to maintain their own little monopolies on their black neighbors, on their black society. Okay, and so American apartheid existed from 1866 until 1948. 1948 was when the American army integrated. In the post-war period, there was a tremendous push to integrate, not from the politicians, not from civil rights leader, but from business. Because due to the war shortage and the loss of manpower because of the deaths of soldiers killed in World War II, there was a lack of workers. And so, on the one hand, there was a push to integrate more women into the workforce. And on the other, there was a push to integrate more blacks into the workforce. And there were a lot of unions that did not want to have black members, unions, okay? Like the United Auto Workers Union did not want to have black workers in its ranks. But Ford wanted to have those black workers for two reasons. Number one, with more workers, they could drive down the price of wages. And that was the first reason. And the second reason was that they knew that with more black workers, there would be more discord among the unions, because the black workers and the white workers would be at each other's throats and would have different agendas and different priorities. And so Ford and General Motors and the other auto companies wanted to integrate because it would benefit them. Okay. And the American Army wanted to integrate for more or less the same reason, although, of course, there was not the issue of the unions and whatnot. They simply wanted more manpower. Okay. And so that's why in 1948, the Army began to integrate. The unions began to integrate because the factories began to integrate. Then, baseball started to integrate. And by the way, baseball started to integrate at the behest of corporations that were sponsoring baseball and other professional league sports, because that way it would normalize it. And that way they would have an easier time of integrating their factories and thereby driving down the wages of the workers. And that's what was going on. Okay. So American apartheid ended in 1848. Another thing that happened between 1866 and 1948 was the Great American Melting Pot. Because you see, after the Civil War, and notice that after World War II, you had this integration. And after the Civil War, you had a different integration, which is a lot more immigrants coming from Italy, Ukraine, Ireland, Germany, Sweden. They were all coming to the United States, pursuing their dreams. And they were encouraged to assimilate because they were coming to the United States for various reasons. Number one, they were leaving a bad situation behind in the old country. Number two, the people in the United States, the leadership in the United States, realized that they had this huge continent at their disposal. But see, you actually have to have people who are going to live on the land before you can claim that it's actually your land. And so what happened was that the American government fomented this immigration, of course, and they gave people free land and all the rest of it, and the gold rush and all this bullshit of all these people coming to the United States to populate this empty continent and make it a country that went from sea to shining sea. Now, their notion was that these immigrants coming from all these different countries in Europe that had radically different, not merely ethnicities. Ethnically, they weren't that different, but culturally, they were very different. Their language, their customs, everything. And so the notion was hit upon of the Great American Melting Pot. You had to assimilate. You had to learn English, and they made it a point. And there was a lot of discrimination against European immigrants who did not assimilate. There were signs and there are pictures of signs that say, Irish need not apply. I mean, the kind of discrimination was vicious against other white people. Okay. And it was because the native population in the United States didn't like the fact of these immigrants on the one hand, because they also recognized that this new population that was coming in was going to drive down the price of labor. And on the other hand, you had this need for new people to colonize this huge continent. And so there was from 1866 to 1948, this notion of the Great American Melting Pot. Now, after World War II from 1939 to 1945, although the Pacific War was actually from 1931 to 1945. But anyway, after World War II, America had conquered Europe and Asia. Don't pretend otherwise. A lot of people say, well, we liberated it. No, the United States conquered those regions, conquered them, and imposed their political orthodoxy, i.e. liberalism. And the nations in Asia that were conquered by America, Japan, Thailand, all the countries in Asia that were taken away from Japan, Imperial Japan, and all the nations west of the Iron Curtain, they all got their own brand of liberalism. And it worked in these countries because each of these countries had two things at the same time. Number one, they were poor. And number two, they were ethnically homogenous. So liberalism worked extremely well in all of these countries. I mean, think Germany, think France, think Spain. Well, Spain wasn't conquered by the United States. Think Italy. All the countries conquered by the United States, they got liberalism, okay? American-style liberalism. And it worked. With the end of American apartheid in 1964, however, that's when we started to see disparate outcomes among different racial groups. Because you see, during the Great American Melting Pot period of 1866 to 1948, and the momentum of it continued after 48 right into the 70s. I grew up on the tail end of that, right? Well, what happened is that the Great American Melting Pot deliberately ignored the issue of different racial categories. It deliberately went out of its way to create a meritocratic system. The SATs, for instance, the Scholastic Aptitude Tests, were implemented in the Ivy League universities in the 1920s precisely so that more Jews would be able to get into universities, because the notion was you want a meritocracy. You want the best people to rise up in the United States. You don't want to have an aristocracy. And so all of these measures were implemented to eliminate racial differences, or ignore them at least, and make sure that the society was meritocratic. And if you'll notice, between 1866 and 1948, you saw the blossoming of the United States, even though there was a Great Depression. And the Great Depression, you could argue, was really the fault of the FDR regime, but that's for another webinar. The point is that the Great American Melting Pot system really worked because it ignored the great thorn of liberalism, how different ethnic groups have different average outcomes. Because even among the European immigrants, the Italians, the Jews, the Swedes, the Polacks, the Irish, they had different outcomes. But with the notion of the Great American Melting Pot, nobody paid attention to that. See, if in 1920, the same kind of racial self-consciousness had been applied, you would have noticed that certain groups were doing exceptionally well and other groups were doing exceptionally poorly, and you would have said it's because of racism. You would have noticed that the Irish were doing very poorly, the Italians were doing very poorly, the Jews were doing very well, the Swedes and the Norwegians were doing very well, and you would have said, aha, racism. See? I mean, you would have been a critical race theorist and said, yeah, they're discriminating against the Poles, they're discriminating against the Irish, they're discriminating against the Italian, fucking racists, man. See? But since there was, on the contrary, this drive to assimilation, and the Second World War created pressure to not be racially self-conscious, and on the contrary, for everybody to pull together. Well, you see, during that period, nobody paid attention to the different the different outcomes of different racial groups. And do keep in mind, remember, in the United States during that period, blacks and whites of all ethnicities were separate. And you say that it's unfair or that's racist. I don't care, but that's the reality. They were separate, okay? And because of it, there was no comparison between blacks and whites because they weren't playing the same game. They were two peoples living in two separate countries that were geographically identical, but socially light years apart. American apartheid. And because of that, they were never able to compare to one another because they were living separate lives. You see? Okay. So American apartheid ended in 1964 for the reasons I explained, that the shortage of workers led to the desire for more integration of blacks into white society so as to drive down the price of labor, and also more black soldiers for the American army that was lacking in soldiers. Okay. And so between 1948 and 1964, you had a series of measures, principally the Civil Rights Acts of 1957 and then the Civil Rights Acts of 1964, that led to the end of the apartheid system, integration. Okay. There are a lot of people who are against integration, many of them for racial reasons, that they simply didn't like blacks. Many of the blacks didn't want to integrate either because they didn't like whites. Okay. I mean, I always find it just incredibly amusing how, the blacks are supposed to be treated like the magical Negroes. Have you ever heard of the concept of the magical Negro? It was invented by Spike Lee, the filmmaker. And he said that there are these films where you have this black character who's like perfect. He's like morally perfect and pure. He's like a magical Negro. He has no defects. And he's like just the Simon Pure character who floats through the movie, right? And yeah, a lot of people today, black and white, think that all blacks wanted to integrate because they were magical Negroes, because they were so good and pure and moral and decent and blah blah blah. The fact is, a lot of blacks didn't want to integrate. They didn't like white people, and blacks are notoriously racist, and they despised what they consider white trash. And this is famous. Anybody who's lived in the United States and has gone outside of a middle class bubble can tell you, black people hate what they consider white trash. Okay. And so, yeah, there's animosity going every which way. But anyway, the point that I'm trying to make, and let me just do a quick sound check. Give me a +1 if everything's copacetic with the sound. Yeah. And so what happened was that the end of apartheid in American apartheid in 1964, that's when we started to see disparities in outcome among the different racial groups. Why? Well, because all of a sudden, after the end of American apartheid with the Civil Rights Act of 1964, whites and blacks started to compete head to head, and blacks weren't succeeding. Okay, but let me adjust that a little bit. It's not that blacks weren't succeeding. Blacks were succeeding in certain endeavors, and they were failing at other endeavors. In physical activity, in professional sports, in construction, and other physically demanding labor, they were outperforming whites on average. And in other activities that demanded more education or more brain power or more critical thinking or more whatever you want to call it, blacks were underperforming. And they were underperforming other groups, and whites were also underperforming other groups. I mean, there's like a whole smorgasbord, like Jews were outperforming everybody at that time before the big influx of Asians, during the 1960s and 70s, who came from Vietnam, China, and whatnot. Okay. And so, so there were, that's when you started seeing in 1964, you started to see these disparate outcomes among the different racial groups. In 1965, just a year after the end of American apartheid, you started seeing affirmative action implemented for the first time. It was implemented first in the government, okay? And the whole point of affirmative action was to curb those racial disparities. But the problem is that affirmative action didn't work. It's as simple as that. It just did not work, okay? And you can argue as to why it didn't work, but it didn't work. It's the bottom line, okay? Because a lot of people who benefited from affirmative action were not as capable as those who were penalized by affirmative action. Ergo, affirmative action didn't work, okay? And affirmative action If you understand liberalism, you realize that it's the first time that liberalism is short-circuited. Because the whole point of liberalism is that all men are created equal, egalitarianism. And you need egalitarianism so that people can rise and fall based on their own personal inherent qualities. But affirmative action says this group of people gets special treatment, i.e., better treatment. This group of people for an arbitrary reason. And what's that? That's an aristocracy. Yeah. I mean, we think of aristocracy as, French blue bloods and people hanging out in the court of Versailles and, throne rooms and shit like that. That's the kind of aristocracy we think about, right? Or maybe we think of, British people, lords and ladies and whatnot, having afternoon tea, while in the distance we see a bunch of horses and a bunch of beagles fox hunting through the fields in jolly old England, right? But an aristocracy is simply when one group of people, for whatever arbitrary reason, gets benefits that the rest of the population does not get. And that's what affirmative action was. Affirmative action was the first short-circuiting of liberalism. Okay? And that's when it started. That's when the great thorn of liberalism, the disparate outcomes among different racial groups, the cure for it created its demise or started its demise. Okay? Now, in the United States and the other liberal democracies of the West from 1965 to 2021, there was much greater movement of people from poor areas to the West. Yeah, because we had more technology. We had communications technology and transportation technology. Transportation technology came first. The jet airplane, you were able to travel around the world in 72 hours. It's a remarkable achievement, by the way. People don't pay enough attention to it. Two things that you should pay attention to that are really important. I mean, real breakthroughs. People say, oh, we got to the moon. Isn't that amazing? No, that's not amazing. What's amazing is that you can go from any spot on the globe to any other spot in the globe in 72 hours. That's all it takes you. Okay? You can go from any spot, no matter how absurd the place is. You can get from any one spot. You take some car to a local airport. At the local airport, you take a plane, a small plane, to the major airport. From the major airport to another major city. From the other major city to the smaller airport. And from the smaller airport, you hop in a car and get to wherever the fuck you are going to. Okay? Those 5 trips, you can go from one end of the earth to the other in 72 hours or less. That is remarkable. That's number one. And number two is container shipping, which you think, well, Jesus Christ, it's so trivial. No, container shipping is incredible because what it is it's a steel box and you fill it with whatever crap you're selling. And you fill it up in your factory. And with a very cheap, readily available crane, you load up that steel box onto a flatbed truck, and that flatbed truck takes it to a harbor and loads it onto a boat, and that boat crosses whatever oceans are necessary and delivers it onto another flatbed truck that takes that cargo all the way to whatever factory or store or whatever the fuck and delivers. That is remarkable. That is a remarkable technological and organizational feat, a logistics feat. And it's the basis of our civilization, quite frankly. People don't seem to realize it. But anyway, well, remember what happened in the Suez Canal a few months ago? Yeah, that pretty much showed it. One little fucking boat that fucked up and all of global shipping got screwed. That's how much we depend on that kind of shipping, container shipping. Yeah. Somebody ought to make a fucking movie about it because it's really important. But anyway, the point. In the post-war period, especially the period from 65 up until today, you had greater movement of goods and services and people. Okay? It's cheaper to travel from anywhere on the globe to any other place in the globe. It's incredibly cheap. Why do people travel? To pursue greater economic opportunities. So all of a sudden, with this cheap airfare, or this cheap ability to go from one place to another, forget about the fact that Biden opened the borders in the south of the United States. Forget about that. Just the fact that you can get on a fucking plane and go to any country in the world for a relatively modest amount of money, money that any worker in any halfway decent country can accumulate in 6 months, say, which is unheard of. It's remarkable. Okay. So people can travel anywhere. And so, of course, they do. They travel to the rich countries. And which are the rich countries? The liberal countries, the countries that have implemented liberal political organization that allows them to create incredible prosperity. And so all these immigrants come to these rich societies, all the democracies in the West, in the United States, okay? They are pursuing greater economic opportunity. And see, they are leaving a bad situation, or at least striving towards a better situation in the West, in the United States and the Western democracy, right? But what about in the Western democracies in the United States? Well, you got, as usual, you've got capitalists who see these incoming workers and they just rub their hands together and they say, cheap labor, cheap labor. And so they accept these. I mean, not only do they accept these workers, they encourage it. Of course they encourage it, okay? And a lot of people think that, it's trying to kill off the white man in Europe and the Americas and shit like that. No, it has nothing to do with that. That's merely a byproduct of the real desire. And the real desire is to get cheap laborers, okay? I'm going to discuss Germany in a bit, but in the 1950s, it was the West German government that started implementing Turkish truck drivers because the companies, the oligarchs in Germany, didn't want to pay through the nose for German drivers. They thought it was unfair. And so they lobbied the German government, the West German government at the time, to ease up on restrictions of Turkish drivers. And so, of course, these Turkish drivers were allowed to move to West Germany, but it was only going to be temporary. They were giving 90-day visas and shit like that, right? And then the 90-day visas were extended because the factory owners and whatnot, they were paying these Turkish drivers a hell of a lot less, and they wanted to continue this gravy train. Because, of course, if you pay your workers less, that means you make more money, now, isn't it? Right? And so that's what they wanted to do. And so they lobbied the West German government, and lo and behold, all of a sudden you had like a bunch of Turks moving to Germany. See? That's how it happens. And it happens because the society is doing well. It's getting rich. And as it gets rich, it imports workers to drive down the cost of labor. It's a story as old as time. It happened during the fucking Roman Empire. It's happening now. Okay? So anyway, with more immigration, an even clearer distinction in economic outcome emerges among the different ethnic groups. Yeah, because you see, the people who are emigrating, who are they? They're immigrants, obviously, but they are from a different ethnic and cultural background. By definition, they're not locals. Of course not. They're not Americans from the melting pot, be they black or white. They're, Africans perhaps, or Central or South Americans, or Asians, or whoever the fuck. It doesn't really matter who they are, but they're different. They're not the same people as the ones living in the society today. They don't share the same fucking values. The only value they care about is the liberal possibility of pursuing their dreams and making a shit ton of money. For whatever reason, a lot of these people make a lot of money to send back home to, their parents or grandparents or whoever the fuck, right? A lot of them want to make a lot of money because they want to provide their own children here in America or here in Europe with the best opportunities and whatnot. Doesn't matter why, but they're pursuing the dream in the West of making a lot of money, okay? But by doing that, they are creating these different groups, ethnic groups, in the liberal democracy. You see? Okay, so critical race theory comes into play because, see, as different groups emerge, or let me phrase that, as different groups of different ethnic and cultural backgrounds come to the West, they create these different groups, and these different groups have different average outcomes. As they have different average outcomes, critical race theory becomes more politically effective, certainly more politically effective than race realism. Because what does race realism say? It says, that's the way life is, tough luck. I mean, some groups are very high in IQ and very high in impulse control, and so those groups are going to rise. And others are lower in IQ or lower in impulse control or lower in agreeableness or whatever quality. and leads to less success. That's what race realism says. And their answer is no answer. Their solution to this problem is tough luck. But critical race theory says those racists are keeping you down. Let's fight them. Now, that's a very, very seductive approach. Yeah, I mean, think about it. See, you're you, and you're trying and you're not doing so well as the other guy next to you. You know, your neighbor who's just of a different race. Doesn't matter what race it is. Well, let's say he's white, and you're a brown guy, and you're not doing so well as the white guy. And it could be that you're actually kind of lazy, okay? And not because you're brown, just because you're you, okay? But, you know, what's the natural human urge? I mean, nobody wants to look in the mirror and say, yeah, I'm a lazy bum, okay? I mean, like fucking today, I had to do some things in the morning. Oh, man. I didn't get around to doing because I was a fucking bum, because I was lazy little shit, right? And, you know, admitting that, it's hard, especially when it's a bigger deal, because like the things I had to do were just trivial shit. You know, it's like I had to update my insurance policy and crap like that. I mean, easy crap, right? But what happens is that, see, few people have the nerve to look at themselves in the mirror and say, I was lazy. Few people have the nerve, have the courage to look at themselves in the mirror and say, it's my fault that I have not succeeded. It is much easier, and it has always been easier in every human society of every race to blame somebody else for your misfortunes. I didn't do nothing. He did it. It's fucking human nature, man. And what does critical race theory say? Equity theory, wokeness, all this shit. It says, you know, your life is shit. You're not doing well because of the white guy, because of racism, right? And everybody buys it because it's an easy excuse. And on the flip side, too, there are a lot of white people, and not only white people, Asian people, too, people who are very successful, who, in order to assuage the guilt of success, they latch on to critical race theory. And they say, yeah, it's racism. Racism that I'm doing good. I have privilege. I have white privilege. Even though I'm Asian, but, you know, I have white privilege. I don't really know how, but I do. And that's why I'm doing well. And it's racism. It's the system is at fault. Okay? Yeah, it happens all the time. See? Because a lot of times we feel ashamed of our success when we compare it to other people who are not so successful. And a lot of times we feel undeserving. I mean, a lot of people have the imposter syndrome, right? It's a natural thing that a lot of people suffer from. And it's basically guilt at success. And so critical race theory is great to assuage that feeling. Sure. Okay. Also, to draw attention away from one. See, I'm really successful, really, really successful, disproportionately successful, unfairly successful. And, you know, instead of having everybody look at me and say, how come you're disproportionately successful? I just yell, hey, it's racism. Those white guys did it. And I point to some white Appalachian, white trash, you know, losers who never harmed anybody and don't have a pot to piss in. And me, a rich guy living on Park Avenue, I point to the, you know, Whiskey Tango Appalachians and say, hey, they're the bad guys. They're the racists. And, you know, everybody stops looking at me and starts looking at those poor Whiskey Tangos. You see what I'm saying? Yeah, that's what's going on. Okay. And so, yeah, critical race theory solves a lot of problems. Okay. It gives people an excuse to blame somebody. Bottom line, that's the issue. Okay. See, it's not the natural state of affairs. Race realism says it's the natural state of affairs, and that is not politically convincing. Nobody wants to hear that shit. Okay. Nobody wants to hear, yeah, well, you know, it sucks to be you. That's life. Nobody wants to hear that. We want to hear that there's a victim and that there's someone to blame, because that's human nature. Now, CRT, critical race theory, inevitably leads to preferential treatment. Okay. Because if you're going to blame somebody, that means that somebody else is going to get raised up. And critical race theory is what breaks liberalism, because it elevates a group of people or denigrates a group of people. It doesn't really matter how you frame it, because the net result is the same. It elevates minorities or it denigrates whites. And indistinctly, by the way, because everybody knows that there are different kinds of white people. There are different white people in terms of ethnicity and in terms of class. to claim that all white people are like homogenous, that's just stupid. I mean, this is fucking idiotic. Okay. I mean, they're all different. It's like saying that, oh, he's just an African. Dude, Africa has like 130 languages, and God alone knows how many tribes and subdivisions and subgroups and whatnot. I mean, dude, to say that is just to say, oh, he's just a black guy from Africa. It's just absurd. You have to be a hell of a lot more precise. There's a hell of a lot more distinctions between the different people in Africa. And just as the same applies to white people in America or Europe, for that matter. Huh? But CRT, critical race theory, it just flattens all that shit and just points to the white guy. And it elevates those who are minorities. And so it's breaking liberalism, and it's creating a neo-aristocracy, this aristocracy of resentment. See? And that's kind of unique, because previously aristocracies, the people who were in the upper classes, the people who were quote unquote privileged, well, they had something to boast that made them that. See? I mean, like with the Vikings, right? The guys who were privileged, the people who were at the top, they were the best warriors, right? The people in, like, say, pre-revolutionary France, the aristocrats there, they had the best breeding and the best education. I mean, they had something to be proud of. But in critical race theory, the people who are at the top are the victims. It's really weird, but that's how it goes, Now, let's look at this whole process from top to bottom to understand how it leads to CRT, how liberalism inevitably leads to critical race theory or something like it, okay? And once you get to critical race theory, it's the end of liberalism, okay? This is the process. Liberalism is established in a poor, ethnically homogenous region or nation, okay? Like the United States, like post-war Germany. Post-war Germany was annihilated. It was zero. It's flat, okay? And they imposed liberalism there, and look what happened to the post-war German boom, yeah? Okay, liberalism is established in a poor country. You can say, a lot of people would say that liberalism was established in Great Britain. That's not true. Liberalism emerged from Great Britain, absolutely. Started with Isaac Newton. Isaac Newton, he himself, of course, didn't write any kind of liberal philosophy, but he inspired and gave impetus to a lot of the Enlightenment thinkers in Great Britain, like Hobbes specifically. And all these guys, they grew out of that tradition in England. But the thing is, see, England, Great Britain, it has never been truly liberal in a universal sense. England has always been aristocratic. The upper classes in Great Britain, specifically England, they're liberal, but just the upper class. But insofar as the rest of society is concerned, there are clear class divisions, and they are insurmountable. And somebody who is of a lower social strata, some chav who talks with a Cockney accent, he is never going to rise up. Maybe with a tremendous effort, he might, but for the most part, no. I mean, look at David Cameron and Boris Johnson. Eton, Oxbridge, the Bullington Club, yeah, they're aristocrats. Okay, they're not titled, either one of them, but they're aristocrats. All of the British political establishment are aristocrats, or the vast majority of them, and liberalism functions among that particular class in the United Kingdom. But the United Kingdom in and of itself is a class-based society, okay? And now it's being broken by these immigrants, but that's for another broadcast. Anyway, liberalism is established in a poor, ethnically homogenous region or nation. The liberal region or nation flourishes because of a more efficient allocation of human capital due to equality and the lack of aristocracy. That is social movement. People rise and fall based on their ability. See, the lack of an aristocracy, the equality of all, allows for people to rise and fall based on their own merits, which makes for the overall society to be much more efficient. The flourishing liberal region nation becomes a magnet for people from poorer, non-liberal regions. Of course, see? I mean, you're some poor region, right? And you implement the system of meritocracy, and egalitarianism. And your society starts to flourish, right? You start to make a lot of money. What the fuck do you think happens? People notice it and say, "Hey, I want to go to that country because they're making a lot of money. Maybe I can make myself some of that money," and they go there. Of course, okay. These immigrants come from different ethnic cultural backgrounds and do not do as well as the locals. That should be very obvious. Yeah, an immigrant will never do so well as the local. Maybe the second or third generation will do as well as the local, but the first generation will never do as well as the local. By definition, because he's starting as an adult in a new society, he doesn't know the rules, he doesn't even know the language. It's going to be very, very difficult for him to succeed. His children might, but he won't. See? The immigrant's failure is chalked up to racism. Okay? It's not chalked up to the fact that he is new. It's not chalked up to the fact that he comes from a radically different culture. No, it's chalked up to racism. The immigrant's failure is chalked up to racism instead of the reality of different races having different aggregate abilities. That's the great thorn on the side of liberalism, right? To correct the alleged racism, the locals are shamed and policies implemented to, quote, help the underperforming minority. Thus, a neo-aristocracy of the less capable is created, both fueling more resentment and ending the social equality necessary for liberalism to succeed. See, because the people who wind up at the top are paradoxically less capable because of this system. See, because you want to help these people, you fundamentally start to break the society. You break the thing that made it great. And it is an inevitable cycle. And I can prove it to you. The perfect example is post-war Germany. Now, not many people outside of Germany know this. But Winston Churchill, well, he was a piece of shit and a genocidal maniac who hated Germany with a passion. And he implemented the forced migration of the German people and their expungement from Eastern Europe, and they're all dumping in what is now geographically Germany. You see, because the German people were spread out all over Central Europe. And after the war, the Soviets, who were fucking barbarians, apart from raping, half the German women because they were fucking savages as far as I'm concerned. And I'm not talking about the Russian soldier himself, because there are a lot of Russian officers who were outraged by this. Solzhenitsyn, for instance, is a famous example. And for his sins of criticizing this, he wound up going for 10 years to the gulags. Yeah, that's why he went, by the way. He was outraged at this policy of forcibly raping all the German women that his soldiers conquered, right? But anyway, what happened was that the Germans were all tidied up by Winston Churchill's policies after the war, this forced migration and whatnot, which destroyed, it destroyed the lives of millions of people. It killed like something like about 1 million Germans. Yeah, people never talk about that, but that's true. They died of disease and the effort of transport, the elderly and whatnot. About 1 million Germans were killed in this forced migration, implemented by Winston Churchill, the famous Winston Churchill. May he rot in hell, the fucking bastard. Anyway, they were all tidied up in post-war Germany, okay? And what happened was that post-war Germany was a shambles. It, victim of total war. The whole fucking place was just, level. It was just rubble. And the Germans, they got this liberalism. They had no experience with this kind of liberalism because it's not their culture, political culture, not at all. I mean, the whole liberal project from them is light years away from their own political culture. But they adopted it because they'd been conquered. And they implemented the system, and West Germany, in short order, became an economic powerhouse. And like I said, 10 years after the end of the Second World War, barely 8 years after the end of the mass migration of Germans into Germany, the Germans found themselves in a situation where they were doing so well that they needed to import Turkish drivers. And that's how their immigration started. And as time went on, more and more migrants started going to Germany. And what has happened is that these immigrants, they have different rates of success as the native Germans who are a homogenous people, of course. And so what happens is that you start getting more and more help, quote unquote, for these racial minorities. And you start to see the country start to decay and fall apart. And you're seeing that in Germany today. And I know it. I lived in Germany, okay? And I can see how it's falling apart. That's the way of liberalism. And the post-war example of Germany illustrates the cycle almost perfectly. See? Now, Germany is falling apart. And it has all these political divisions because of all these immigrants who came because of the economic prosperity of Germany. And they wanted to take advantage of it. Why not? I mean, it's perfectly understandable. I mean, if you see a country that is rich in opportunity and infrastructure and whatnot, you want to go there. You want to raise your family there. But of course, you're not one of those people, and you're not going to share the same values. And of course, because you're an ethnic, a different ethnicity and a different cultural group, you're going to have different average outcome. And that's going to generate resentment. And that's going to lead to critical race theory or wokesterism or equity theory or communism. Call it what you will. It's all the same fucking thing. It's an ideology of resentment. Resentment because one ethnic group does not do so well as another ethnic group. And so to fix the situation, you create a neo-aristocracy. And you see that in Germany, where the government insists that that minority-owned companies get contracts, government contracts, that there be minorities in the board of directors of all these companies, irrespective of their merit. See, you create a neo-aristocracy of incompetent people, because that's the tragedy. You're putting incompetent people at the helm, see, at the top. Not the capable one, not the best warrior or the most educated and refined person. No, you're putting on top the losers. That's what's going on. And Germany, post-war Germany, is a prime example. Now, the only way to short-circuit this process, as far as I can tell, is this process of liberal decay, is to create the fiction of a melting pot and consciously ignore the great thorn being that different ethnic groups have different aggregate outcomes. That's the only way to do it. Now, this doesn't happen organically. It doesn't happen like, you know, that people naturally gravitate like, hey, let's all pretend that we're a melting pot, because it's a fiction. A melting pot is a fiction. It's a fiction that works, but it's a fiction. Okay. The only way it can happen organically, there has to be an external pressure, an external crisis of some sort. In the United States, World War II was that external pressure, that external crisis. World War II, and also the Great Depression before that, and World War I before it, all of these crises forged the notion of the melting pot. Because you see, in the late 19th century, there was a lot of racial antagonism. But in the crash of 1896, that led to a depression, a severe depression. People have forgotten that, or not forgotten that. They never knew it because they haven't read the fucking history, but I have. See, in the late 19th century and early 20th century, there was a very, very bad depression. And then there was the First World War, and then the Great Depression, and then the Second World War. All of these crises led to the notion of the melting pot, so as to pacify all of the racial antagonism that was existing at that time. Now, remember, the racial antagonism was not between blacks and whites. It was between different groups of white people, between the Irish and the Italians and the Jews and the Poles and the Germans and the Swedes and the, all these different European peoples who had emigrated to America and hated each other. Yeah, because the ethnic hatred of these people from the old country, it carried on into the new world. Sure. Okay. And so the only way to pacify all this was to create this fiction of the great American melting pot. And it worked for quite a while. Okay. But it ends eventually. It ends because of prosperity. Prosperity brings it to an end. And it doesn't end the decay, a fiction like the melting pot. It merely postpones it. Because once the pressure is gone, once the society is flourishing once again, the great thorn of disparate outcomes among different ethnic groups is noticed once again. And here's a key issue, see? In the Western democracies, how do you gain power? By gaining adherence. And so if you raise something that brings up a lot of resentment, you'll become instantly popular. Of course. If you talk about something that a lot of people have a resentful attitude towards, they will join your standard. I mean, come on, look at my own case insofar as my CRP channel. I do a lot of videos about women, and I don't mean to, but I touch on the fact that a lot of men are resentful towards women because they feel sexually disenfranchised. So because of that, I have 270,000 subscribers. See, it's not that I'm like trying to stoke sexual resentment. On the contrary, you guys have seen my content. More often than not, or all the time, as far as I'm concerned, this is my objective. I'm trying to have guys understand women, not to hate them, not to feel resentful towards them. On the contrary, I want them to appreciate women realistically, understand women, understand them so that they can get the woman that they want and stop being resentful. That's my goal as a content creator, right? But see, when you stoke resentment, you gather adherence. It's natural. Yeah. And think of it in these terms, I'm pissed off that, my favorite sports team lost, and so are you, and so is everybody around. And I say, I'm so fucking pissed that, the Cowboys lost to the Patriots or whatever the fuck. And everybody's like, yeah, me too. Yeah, me too. And all of a sudden, everybody's like, yeah, I'm really resentful and angry about this shit. And all of a sudden, we find common cause. And all of a sudden, we feel that we belong. See? We have the same resentment. I'm giving this silly hypothetical as a hypothetical, but you see the point. See? I say to you, you're not doing well economically because of racism. Not you. You're fine. You're great. You're dandy. But racism, that's why you're not succeeding. And you look at me and it's a lie. Saying that's a key issue because it's a lie. Mm-hmm. Because you know that you didn't succeed because you weren't so lucky, you weren't so capable, you weren't so hardworking. Because we all know that luck plays a big factor in success, undoubtedly. But also hard work, also, just being capable, right? And we all know when it's not really racism. It's some other factor, a more nuanced factor. It's not that the white guy is sitting around and saying, hey, rubbing his hands together once again, saying, hey, how can I fuck over all the minority people, huh? There's this spick I heard about, CRP. How do I fuck him over? Nobody's saying that. No white guy is saying that about me. That's absurd. Huh? Of course it's absurd, but it's tempting to believe it. It's incredibly tempting. I mean, it is so tempting that you have to make a conscious effort to step away from such a intoxicating brew as resentment. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. So anyway, going back to this, yeah, a melting pot is only going to postpone this thing. And with prosperity, you're going to have the CRT, and the CRT, by creating this neo aristocracy, it leads to the undermining of the very thing that made the liberal society successful. And that's how it ends. Mm-hmm. And we're seeing that. We're seeing that in real time. We're seeing how the liberal project is collapsing under this CRT bullshit of racism. And people are so scared of being called a racist that they're doing, handstands, for crying out loud, in order to avoid it. And they're doing all kinds of stupid shit that only hurts the liberal democracy. See? It's an inevitable cycle. And what'll happen, it seems to me, that this society, the Western liberal democracies, will continue to decay until, and there will be more and more pressure against white people. And I thought that this might take several decades, but I actually am thinking that it might take just a few years. And the backlash will be horrifying. Okay? And I'm not saying this, that this is something to look forward to. On the contrary, I think it's going to be fucking horrifying. Okay? The backlash, because see, if you um, abuse a people who are the majority, eventually they're not going to take it anymore. Eventually they're going to lash out. I don't know how, and I don't know when, but it's inevitable. Okay? Just as, I don't know exactly when the sun is going to set, but it is going to set. Okay? That's inevitable because the earth spins around on its axis, and, relatively speaking, the sun rises and it sets. And I don't know the exact time it'll set, but it will. And right now I'm looking out the window and the sun is fucking golden. Yeah. The sun is golden. And so I figure that, it's only going to be an hour or so at most before the sun sets and it's fucking dark. Yeah. If you abuse the majority of the population with this racial resentment bullshit, it's inevitable that there will be a reaction. It works like in South Africa, where the blacks are a majority of the population and the whites are 10% of the population or less, or 8%, some shit like that, right? Then, yeah, sure, no problem. The whites, what the fuck are they going to do? Fucking nothing, They're outnumbered 10-1. I mean, fuck off. They're not going to do shit. But in the West, and my thinking, where it'll start? I think it'll start in France, of all places. I think it's going to start in France, where the Frenchmen, they're going to say, fuck these people. These people meaning immigrants. Fuck these people. Fuck these people. Let's get rid of them once and for all, because they're not fucking French. I'm fucking French. This is my fucking homeland. Let's get rid of these fuckers. Yeah. And I think that, I mean, if I had to bet, yeah, I'd say that France is the first place. It's already starting to happen, by the way. The yellow vest protests that lasted God knows how long, they've morphed into these anti-vaccination protests. Have you seen the images of those protests? They're enormous. Okay, they're bigger than the yellow vest demonstrations. And my thinking is that the French, they're the ones. And I've been thinking about it because of the anti-vax protests. The anti-vax, I mean, I've seen videos, lots of videos. I mean, chock full. Just look around online, and you see so many people. And it's not just, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions. You see waves of people all marching against this shit. And they're not marching against the vaccine passports. They're marching against the fact that they are the targets of abuse. The multicultural system has been abusing them, because ultimately this multiculturalism bullshit, right? I mean, I haven't even used the term multicultural, but I should have. But this is all multiculturalism. This is what we're talking about, and people hate it, and people are sick and tired of it. The majority people, and like it or not, in France, the majority of France are Frenchmen. They're white people. It's their fucking homeland. They've been there for fucking millennia. Okay. I mean, what, 3, 4, 5,000 years have the fucking Frenchmen been there? It's their home. And they don't want to be displaced by immigrant parvenus who hate them and want to destroy everything that they built, burn their churches, burn the fucking Notre Dame. Fuck no. So if I had to guess, if I had to put money, they're the first ones who are going to fight back. And since they understand the notion of an aristocracy and they don't really mind it, I think that some sort of nationalist group will arise there and just blow them the fuck out of the water. Blow the immigrants and the multiculturalists and the white people pushing the multiculturalism shit, just blow them the fuck out of the water. And that's, if I had to bet, okay? Do I think that violence is a good thing? Fuck no. Am I advocating violence? No. I'm just looking at the situation and making an educated guess as to what I think will happen. I have to make that clear. I am not advocating for violence, but what I am saying is that if you keep on abusing people as the multiculturalists keep on doing, it is inevitable that you are going to elicit a violent counter-reaction. And that violent counter-reaction will be orders of magnitude, plural, greater than the abuses that have been suffered. Because that's the way of human nature, I mean, if you slap me across the face, what do? I pull out a gun. And you say, but God, a gun is disproportionate. Yeah, but that's human nature. When we feel aggrieved, we lash out in a way that's disproportionate. That's always been human nature. I mean, fuck human nature, animal nature. Have you ever seen the animals? Yeah, that happens all the time. Yeah, they feel aggrieved, be it an animal or a person, and they lash out in orders of magnitude greater than the offense received. Multiculturalism, critical race theory, this whole bullshit. It's torpedoing the civilizations and creating a neo-aristocracy of incompetent people. So it's inevitable. Okay? Yeah, that's what I think. Anyway, that's my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. And now I'm going to kick open the door for some questions. So let me hop in there. I'm copy to clipboard and post. And there's the link. I just put it in the chat. The black sun is about to set. Yeah. Calm your tits, buddy. Are you talking to me, Unsung Hero? Respect women. Unsung Hero is said to be either a simp or a fed. I don't know. Unsung Hero. What's Unsung Hero said that leads people to think that he's a simp or a fed? Yeah, the marshmallow experiment of impulse control. Yeah, I've done something similar with my kids. Only candy and cookies and shit like that, not marshmallows. Yeah. Idlo, your device is not connected. Let's see. Oh, Idlo, there you are. Hello, Idlo, are you there?
Hey, Gonzalo, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you fine. How's it going, man?
Yeah, it's very good. Very nice presentation, by the way.
I'm glad you liked it. Thank you very much. I appreciate that, man. And like once again, I said to everybody, but I'll say to you specifically, sorry about yesterday, but like I said, it couldn't be helped.
Oh, no problem. I could imagine that after the meeting, probably it was too much anyway.
No. Were you there, by the way?
No, actually, I live here in South America, but if I have the chance to go to Ukraine, I will hit you up.
No. It was no problem. The meeting was at 10 o'clock in the morning here. And I left around like 1 o'clock and I had lunch and I was going to go back to the office to do to prepare for the broadcast and whatnot. And then this little mini crisis happened with my kids. And so that's that. But anyway, what's on your mind, man?
Yeah, so I have two, I think two questions. Just that one is that since now liberalism is morphing into this woke regime, will this regime grow? Will be economically prosperous or not?
No.
Not right.
Yeah, because if you're giving financial benefits to people who are not capable, okay, because that's what you're basically doing, right? It's not going to work out for you, right? When you give awards to losers, the overall society goes down the tubes now, doesn't it? So yeah, things are going to get worse for the Western democracies, and yeah, it's because that's the point. The system is in the name of fairness, in the name of eliminating racism, it's awarding positions and power and prerogatives to people who don't deserve it. And that naturally brings down the whole society. And also it demoralizes people, the people who are not part of that aristocracy, because all aristocracies demoralize the more capable people. They always do. See what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. It's like a kind of socialism.
Yeah, it is socialism.
And,
yeah.
And it's getting crazy. I've seen the footage in Australia, like they're using helicopters now to knock down people. That's crazy.
That's a different problem. Yeah. Well, not only the helicopters, they are preventing people from leaving Australia. Australia is becoming a prison, a totalitarian state. No kidding around. I'm not being hyperbolic. It's not that they're making it hard to go back into Australia, which they are. even for Australian citizens. But they are making it hard for people to leave Australia. It's like fucking East Germany before the collapse of the Berlin Wall, you know? I mean, I think it's insane, but, you know, thank God I don't live in Australia. I always thought that, I mean, I've met a lot of Australians, nice people, but I've always thought that Australia and New Zealand, their governments and the way that they run things are kind of nuts. And this kind of like proves my point. The fact that Australia is going full totalitarian is just like, dude, man, I don't get it. But that's life.
Yeah, it's crazy. And yeah, I think that your prediction about France, yeah, I think it could be there where it implodes. But I don't know if you have checked there are nationalist groups forming in the US, in the UK, that are very aware of this replacement of their demography.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. I don't know about the United States because a lot of them are infiltrated by feds. But in France, they're also infiltrated by feds. But the problem is that a lot of the French feds agree with them. That's the thing. And so because of that, I think that a lot of the French feds who have infiltrated these groups will actually, when the chips are down, they'll side with the nationalists. The army officers signed a letter recently, retired army officers, that really just scared the shit out of everybody. I forget the content of it exactly. But yeah, I'm going to start looking at France a little bit more closely to see if that's where the cracks in neoliberalism are going to happen first. Yeah. So anyway,
yeah, hopefully.
Yeah. Anything else on your mind, Italo?
No. Nice shot, Gonzalo. Have a nice day.
You take care. Thank you so much for being on. I really appreciate it. Hey, Robert, how's it going?
Hey, Coach. Good to talk to you again.
Yeah, great talking to you, man. What's up?
Yeah, so you kind of mentioned the timelines, and this is something that I've been thinking about lately. Yeah. Is specifically with the American Revolution, things happened slower. Things just were a slower pace of life in general.
Of course.
And this is something I've been thinking of regarding some sort of issue we are having here, the kind of degeneration of society I've noticed in the last couple of years. Here in the U.S., it's just getting worse and worse and worse at an ever-increasing pace. Yeah. So given that, roughly how many years are we thinking about? Are we thinking about inside this decade? Are we thinking about next 5 years or something like that? Well, I just want to hear your thoughts on
that. Sometimes I think it would be months. I mean, some of the shit is happening so fucking fast. I mean, come on. Could you imagine that we'd be where we are 15 months ago when this shit first broke out, the COVID thing first broke out? The kind of lies and bullshit and all this manipulations and blatant propaganda. Can you imagine it? No, nobody could. And yet here we are. And so sometimes I say to myself, maybe 5 years, certainly within 10 years. And then other days I look around and say, man, this shit might not even last the end of this year. Mm-hmm. Look, I'll tell you honestly, and this is going to sound fucking insane, and I know how insane it sounds. But insofar as the November 22 midterm elections, I give it a 50-50 chance that it actually happens.
50-50 chance that it happens just because of the election, or?
Yeah, 50-50. If that would be 50% chance that it happens as normal, or 50% chance that it doesn't happen, that they suspend it. I mean, and to tell you the truth, you know what I think, honestly? I think that if the Democrats don't feel that they can successfully cheat in the November 2022 election, they'll suspend it.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds fucking horrifying. Dude, this is fucking horrifying, where you honestly, and I mean, you realistically believe that one of the two major political parties is so corrupt that they are going to suspend an election if they feel that they cannot successfully cheat at it. But that's what I think. This whole, Andrew Cuomo shit going on, right?
Yeah.
Why the fuck you think it's happening now? To draw attention away from the recounts from Maricopa County and all that bullshit. He is literally a scapegoat. You know what a scapegoat is, right? A scapegoat is a goat that is used as a sacrificial victim to anoint everybody for all their sins, right? He is the scapegoat and the distraction for all the recounts, because the recounts, the last thing that came out was that at least 74,000 votes in in Arizona were fraudulent. And the
Mhm.
only difference in election was, what was it, 20,000 votes? So
Oh, it's
clearly the
less than that.
fucking,
It looks like
yeah,
15,000.
yeah, the election was fucking stolen. Come on, man. I mean, look, it was obvious November 7th or whenever, the day after the election, right? It was obvious then, okay? Because it didn't make any sense. It didn't make any sense that the Republicans won Senate seats, won House seats, but they lost the presidency. That had never happened before. Just that piece of data, it didn't make any sense. And when you start looking at where the key votes happened, and they were all in large democratically controlled cities.
Mhm.
Come on, man. Don't give me bullshit, man. Don't bullshit a bullshitter, you know? I mean, I can spot a scam. I'm a grown up, you know, and again, you know, another clear indication that it was fraudulent. See, why throw all of these legal roadblocks? Why have hundreds of attorneys trying to fight a recount? Because if you think that you won the election fair and square, then you have no problem with counting all the votes again. Yeah, of course not.
Yeah.
You won. You wouldn't have a problem with it. You only throw up legal roadblocks when you know that you didn't win, that it was crooked. Get the fuck out of here. You know, I mean, I'm not saying that to you, Robert. Of course not. I'm saying, you know,
of course.
yeah, in the sense, it just seems absurd. So anyway, it seems very clear to me, and I think that a lot of reasonable people would agree that the Democratic Party, not people who are Democratic voters, but the Democratic Party is incredibly corrupt, and they will do anything in their power to maintain power. And so it seems
Kind of seems like
reasonable.
the mask is off.
Yeah, you know, and so I don't know what the hell happened to the Democratic Party. They lost their fucking minds, as far as I'm concerned. Well, actually, I do know exactly what's going on with the Democratic Party, and what's going on is that you don't have any clear-cut leader, okay, and because of that, each faction feels that they can be as dirty and nasty as they want to be, and it just exacerbates the problem because all these factions are fighting one another, and so they are using every dirty trick against one another and against everybody else, and they feel since there's no leader on top who can, like, basically, you know, slap them down and say, quit acting this way, you're embarrassing us. They keep on going worse and worse and worse and worse. And then the problem is going to become that the Republicans are going to realize, hey, you know, we can't win a straight game, so fuck it, let's go crooked. And that's when you have the end of the democracy. You have a complete, you know, state of chaos and anarchy that will eventually end in tyranny. Okay, and I'm talking real fucking tyranny. Okay, I'm not talking about like, oh, you know, we were living under Obama, the tyranny of Obama, or living under the tyranny of Trump. No, I'm talking about a real tyrant, a real guy who will line up a dozen people up against the wall and have them shot by morning and not even remember it by lunch. You know what I mean? That kind of real tyranny. That seems to be in the cards in the United States, you know? But
yeah, it makes sense. I mean, it certainly makes sense.
It's fucking depressing, isn't it?
Yeah, you know, it is depressing. You know, me kind of getting a younger guy and kind of see what's coming ahead, and I'm like, is that old? I always remember that old analogy of if you're standing on train tracks and the train is barreling down towards you, do you stand there and yell at the train and fight the train? No, get out of the way. It seems like that's the only reasonable recourse now. So I'm trying to look into getting out of LA. Currently in LA.
Oh man, you really are in the belly of the beast.
Oh yeah, it's terrible.
If you don't mind me asking, what neighborhood in LA? Just neighborhood. South Bay. So what's the vibe? What's it look? What's the feeling in the city, on the street?
Well, you know, I've been seeing a lot more people. They're just generally kind of happy, a little bit happier at this because it seems like it's a sense of normalcy. But the people who are in the know, who have any iota of sense, kind of know this is just a lull. It's a calm before the storm, and things are going to get worse.
Why do you think that?
Well, I think they're going to get worse based off of the language. I've been linguistically trained in college, took some classes, and I kind of look at the language that's coming out of the public health department, out of the mayor's office, and it's very clear that they're aiming for another set of lockdowns. It's very clear to me that that's what they're ultimately going for. They're going for that they don't want the return to normal to continue as such, and that I'm expecting some sort of higher up, something probably even from Biden. I think you actually posted on your YouTube channel about that. Yeah, from Jack Posobiec. So I think that's very clear. Anybody who knows is still kind of gathering food, kind of getting ready. And also there's a general sense of unease. I think after, especially the riots, the LA riots back in '92, they were like obviously very bad, and they left a sense of unease afterwards, and people forgot that, oh, that can't happen again. Well, it did. And if it happened twice, it can happen 3 times.
Yeah.
So I think there's a bit of unconsciousness, and to be frank, anybody who is mildly conservative like I am, or very conservative, they left. I'm here because of school issues and stuff, but
How old are
anybody
you?
who has 27.
And you're in school now?
Yeah, grad school.
What are you studying?
Epidemiology.
Really?
Yeah.
So what do you think of the whole bullshit of the vaccine and COVID and all the rest of it?
Well, the vaccine didn't even pass phase 3 clinical trials, so it's obviously untested. It's technically a therapeutic rather than a vaccine, and the data is dubious at best. So I think it's bullshit. And also the whole arguments of, oh, you should be forced to get it. Well, you think about abortion, it's like, well, my body, my choice. Okay, well, if we're going to use the same logic, then bodily autonomy should take prescience, but that's another topic.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I mean, COVID for me.
What about other students there? You're studying epidemiology, and don't the other students realize that it's all bullshit, or are they swallowing the Kool-Aid or drinking the Kool-Aid?
Oh, no, the vast majority have swallowed the Kool-Aid.
Really?
Majority. Oh yeah, I mean there might be 1 or 2 who haven't, and they just keep quiet like I do. I keep my head down. I learned years ago, I'm mixed race. I'm not. I'm part white, part Hispanic, part other stuff. So I'm very mixed. And I noticed years ago that if I just kind of keep my mouth shut, people assume that I'm part of the SJW crowd.
Right.
Hell, I even worked for SJWs for a number of years, and they didn't even think I was conservative until much later.
Yeah.
So I noticed that you just kind of keep your head down. People will make assumptions about you. You can kind of use that to your advantage at times.
Sure, absolutely.
But no, vast majority of them drink the Kool-Aid. They think, let's lock down everything. Let's, public health knows what they're doing. The county knows what they're doing. And it's actually kind of depressing to see. It's really depressing because you're not getting very to even present something like, hey, maybe even suggest like, hey, maybe COVID isn't that bad and we should just kind of, go back to normal. That's like, it's almost like you just
heresy.
It's heresy. Yeah. It's like you just, I can't even think of it like a proper analogy.
It's a heresy. It's a religious heresy. I mean, the whole fucking thing is, when they keep saying trust the science, dude, science is a fucking process. It's not an ideology that you trust in. You don't believe in science. You use science to arrive at the truth, and my thinking is the infection fatality rate from the National Institutes of Health say that on average for the entire population, it's 0.24%. That is 1 out of every 400 people will die of it. It's trivial. Okay. I'm very sorry for the 1 in 400, right? And of course, the number is greater for those who are older and those who have comorbidities. But for people who are younger than 50, and especially children, the risk is infinitesimal. It's less than fucking the regular flu, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it's ridiculous. I also think that, with the changing seasons and it's flu season arriving, and all of a sudden people are just getting sick, and they're going to blame it all on fucking Delta variant. And as I understand it, and you correct me if I'm wrong, there is no fucking test for this Delta variant, let alone the Lambda and Epsilon variant. Am I correct?
You can isolate it in a lab and you can do the genetic sequences, but in terms of out in the wild, you can't differentiate it. I mean, hell, the PCR tests, they can't even differentiate between flu and actual COVID. We don't really have any solid testing that, especially rapid testing.
No. So I think it just strikes me as all bullshit. And the vaccine, man, I count myself extremely lucky that I'm here in the middle of fucking nowhere, in fucking Ukraine, which is poor. So there are no fucking vaccines here available. And nobody gives a shit. Everybody's like, it's no big deal. Nobody cares. Everything is open. All the restaurants are open. Everything is open. And the only time you have to wear a stupid mask is when you pay at the supermarket. Notice, not when you go into the supermarket, not when you wander around, just when you pay. It's just the dumbest fucking thing. You get to the thing and she'll look at you and says mask, and you put on the mask, pay, and then right after you pay, you can take it off. It's totally cosmetic and totally bullshit. And
Yeah.
I mean,
my
look,
only concern with COVID is
Hmm?
is something like the Spanish flu happening, where there's a genetic shift. Spanish flu actually went around once, like 1917, 18, went around
Yep.
the world once, and it was relatively mild. And then a nasty variant appeared. Some people say in Kansas, some people say from the front lines, World War I,
Yep.
who knows? Then much nastier variant occurred, and that's the one everybody remembers, where just people were dropping like flies.
Let me ask
That's
you
my
something.
only concern, is that every time that there's a new infection, every new variant, it's just kind of rolling the dice on whether or not the really nasty stuff comes out. But the odds of that happening is relatively low.
What have you heard about this ADE? The term always slips my mind.
Antibody-dependent enhancement of the virus.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, that. Okay.
Yeah,
Can you
so-
expand on that a little bit, please?
Yeah. So ADE is
And can you repeat the term so that everybody gets
Yeah.
it?
ADE, I believe, refers to antibody-dependent enhancement of the virus,
Yeah.
and it's theorized. We don't know for sure, but it's theorized that part of the reason the initial Spanish flu was so terrible is because it had some sort of component to this. For example, dengue is a great example of this. Dengue
Mhm.
fever isn't too bad when you get it the first time. It's
Right.
it's not a big deal, but they always tell you never get it again because that's what kills you.
Ah.
The body,
Okay.
in kind of layman's terms, the immune system overreacts, and then the immune system kind of goes off into a tizzy, and you get a cytokine storm, and that's kind of what causes some of the issues, and that's what the true danger is that
Okay.
the virus, upon reinfection, the body will recognize the virus and go haywire. The immune
Okay.
system just goes way off the cuff,
Mhm.
and that is you can see some concern, and I don't know, I haven't read any papers on this,
Mhm.
and I'm not too familiar with the historical things, but I believe, no, so don't quote me on this, but I believe some of the vaccines regarding their antibodies, because the whole point is to develop antibodies and humoral immunity, that can actually lead to some sort of ADE.
Yeah. That's what some people are saying. The thing
Yes.
that's more that's hitting us closer is the issue of the vaccine itself creating these spike proteins on the walls of the circulatory system, and
Yeah.
that these spikes can lead to blood clotting. And we've heard blood clotting happening in the brain and the heart, but it can happen throughout the body. And correct me here if I'm wrong, that this problem increases over time, so that eventually everybody who's gotten this shot potentially can have these blood clots that could kill them. Is this an accurate assessment, or am I way off base? And if I am off base, please explain why.
No, I think yeah, there is this spike protein. Now, whether or not that's going to actually lead to any negative long-term effects, we don't know. And I think that's the real danger, is we just don't know. There's just no data on this. There's and to gamble on something like that, and if that is correct, I don't know if it is, but if that is correct, then it becomes a huge issue, because you're now having a large percentage of the population that is gonna be stroking out at any time in the future.
Yeah.
That's not a good thing, and it can accumulate. That's it's like when heart blockages, like plaque buildup in the arteries.
Right.
That can happen it takes decades and decades and decades, but you have that one cheeseburger and that's all it
and
takes.
You pop.
And
Yeah, exactly. And let me ask you something. The decision to inject everybody with this experimental medication, how do you think, from your perspective, how do you think that this decision was made? How did it happen that they're basically rolling the dice with the world's population practically. And they're just crossing their fingers that they roll the dice and they don't get snake eyes, because this shit could potentially be, if it has long-term consequences, i.e. long-term sterility or long-term blood clotting or any of a host of issues that have appeared so far, it could be the demise of the human population. Who do you think made this decision? And do you think that they made it consciously knowing that these negative possibilities were at play? Or do you think that they just decided, fingers crossed, let's go for it?
You know, that's an interesting question, because in terms of scientific evidence, in terms of everything like that, it take a lot. Yeah, there's really not much you can go off, and you could go off all the way and say I've seen conspiracy theories where they go all the way off the deep end.
Yeah.
I think the most simple answer is that the people up at the top and the people making decisions are still human.
Yeah.
And that they are also prone to either panicking and making stupid decisions.
Yeah.
And so, oh, we got this new virus. Oh, we need a vaccine. Well, the traditional method takes years. Let's try this new one and let's just push it just so we can get back to normal. I think that's probably, it's like, what's that old saying? It's like, never attribute malice to what can equally be explained by stupidity.
Yeah.
I think that's probably the most reasonable answer.
Because at this time, my thinking is there's no conspiracy, there's no evil master plan or shit like that. It's just a bunch of people who got panicked and they pushed this. And as negative results are coming up, they're trying to, at different levels, not necessarily the same people at the top, but at different mid-range levels, they're trying to tamp down on the negative outcomes and try to pretend that everything is okay. And of course, as more evidence emerges that this was a horrible decision, the people who made the horrible decision are wanting to double down and say,
justify their own decision.
Yeah, let's go for a third booster shot or a fourth booster shot or where the fuck, because that's how people act when they make a bad decision. None of them ever stand up and say, yeah, I made a horrible decision and I never should have done it, and let's just try to take it back. They never say that. They double down because it's human nature, because you don't want to face the reality, especially if the decision is a really, really terrible one. You have an even greater incentive to double down and pretend that you're right and that everybody else is wrong. I mean, that's been my experience as a grown man, And so would you, Robert, I mean, I know that your perspective is limited on this particular issue. I mean, you're a student after all, right? But would you think that that's the reason?
I think that's most reasonable. I think that's kind of the most reasonable thing is if you notice that it's just basic human nature to apply to the situation. I think that you're on the money. That's essentially the same thoughts I would have.
Well, the other theory I have is it's just the lizard people. That the lizard people wanted us gone and they want to eat our flesh. And so they figure that this was the quickest way to exterminate us all so they can just finally just take over finally, as they've been plotting for years,
Yeah, I didn't want to mention it because I didn't want us to get kicked off. But yeah, it's really the lizard people, since you already said it.
Okay, I've opened the door and we're all in agreement. Everybody hit +1 if you think it's the lizard people who are finally just done with us and want to eat our flesh. We'll wait for chat to catch up. Robert, thank you so much. This was a really interesting conversation, and I really appreciate you showing up. So take it easy, okay?
All right, take care.
Bye-bye. Chris O, how's it going, Chris?
It's going well, Coach. Thanks for the presentation. It's so logical that it's not meant for mass consumption.
Are you calling me Spock? So what's on your mind, man?
Well, first of all, big respect to Robert for his opinion, for his hard work, for keeping his head down in a difficult environment. If I could just add one thing to the analysis of why things are happening, I mean, we should not discount the profit motive. There are people at different levels, whether it's money or power, who benefit from it, whether it's someone who likes being at home and working from home instead of driving to work. So that's already enough to, supporting lockdown. And there are the companies who make billions of dollars on the vaccines, on all sorts of equipment, who are pushing it. So
Oh no! I was talking to a lawyer friend of mine, and back in Chile, and he was saying that back in Chile, a lot of people are pushing for the work from home thing. A lot of law firms, because what they're planning on doing is shutting down their offices and having just really small offices. which is something I with a friend of mine, I predicted back in April of last year when this thing first started to happen, and so many people were successfully working from home. And now, yeah, everybody's, I mean, like commercial real estate in Chile is just tanking because so many people are just, work from home and they want to keep on with this lockdown and work from home shit. So, yeah. So anyway, what's on your mind, man? What question or comment do you have?
Well, one comment, and I disagree on a point, and then
Sure.
two, potentially three quick questions. When talking about the whole ethnic issue, I think that there's a danger of kind of creating this image that it's sort of genetic difference, brain deficiency, or something like that. And so when you talk about ethnicity, I mean, I interpret it as cultural differences, that different races, different groups within a single race have created different cultures based on geographic factors, climatic, or just random factors, that they created a culture that is much more conducive to certain achievements. I mean, the fact that the Chinese have created almost a meritocracy in their history, and they're very hardworking. It's not necessarily because of their the skin color, the brain size. It's just they have created culture for different reasons that impels people, that rewards people, where education is the number one social good, whereas, for example, in the West, it's dying bravely in battle. So when we talk about ethnicity, it's about culture. I mean, I've grown up in a very multicultural environment, and I had friends from all sorts of races, and what kept us together, it's quote unquote same academic culture, whether it's the skin color. So,
well, but the thing is, see, there are racial differences, whether we like it or not. Okay, and it's not something that I understand why a lot of people can get very queasy about that issue, because it raises all kinds of specters of Nazi Germany and shit like that. But to pretend otherwise is kind of silly. Now, do I think that genetics are the only thing that play into this? No, I think that the cultural issues are huge, as you rightly point out. But to say that it's only cultural or only genetic is a mistake. Both are mistakes. It's a combination.
Sure.
And to deny a genetic component is just being naive. It's just being foolish. It's like, look, every animal on the face of the planet, there are subspecies of different animals. Okay, you see it in dogs. I always bring up dogs because it's the animal that I had the most experience of personally, and it's so obvious in certain regards that like, for instance, bulldogs and chihuahuas, they are subspecies. They can mate together, and their offspring will not be sterile, but they are subspecies, and they are, quite frankly, they were genetically designed by human beings to be the way that they are, right? But these two breeds of dogs, bulldogs and chihuahuas, or better yet, pit bulls and Labrador retrievers, right? I mean, Labradors are the most easygoing kind of dog imaginable. And pit bulls, dude, they're dangerous. They're extremely dangerous. And they're high energy, and they're prone to violence and prone to falling, to losing impulse control at a moment's notice. They're extremely dangerous, whereas a Labrador retriever is not. To say that that's cultural is just kind of stupid, because it's not. Okay, because they don't have a culture, or at least they don't have a culture in the way that you and I understand culture. So you have to admit to the fact that there are different groups of people with different qualities that are because of the different subspecies. And it's something that I understand. It makes everybody very uncomfortable. And I know that it opens me up to charges of racism. I'm not being racism. I'm just pointing out the truth. I'm pointing out some things that are factually accurate. Like I said before, Vietnamese people, on average, are shorter than Dutch people. I'm not making it up. It's the truth. Okay? And no Vietnamese person would deny it, because they'd be flying in the face of reality. Because I've fucking lived in Holland. Everybody's like 10 feet tall. Okay? Well, they're not 10 feet tall. Most of the women I met, they were at least 5'8", 5'9", at least. Okay? And you go to Vietnam, there are going to be very few women above 5'2". Okay? Because that's the way it is, And so to deny that is ridiculous. Is it the only reason? No. Is it a Dominant reason, yes, but I also think that there are certain cultural issues that would also dominate. For example, in the Chinese culture, because of the Mongol invasion, they became extremely conservative insofar as knowledge acquisition is concerned. And that's why they have the system of rote learning. And they do not celebrate people who deviate from tradition, deviate from the norm. They are a very, very compliant people. And that's why you have very little scientific innovation from China. The Chinese have had to resort to stealing technical innovation from other countries in order to improve different aspects of their economy. And this is very well known because of cultural issues. Okay, it's not that the Chinese are stupid. It's not that they are uncreative. No, it's because of very clear and very well understood cultural reasons, historical reasons, that have led them to a culture that they have. But it's a determinant factor. See? I mean, how can I put this? Let me rephrase my thinking. Whether something, a determining factor, is genetic or cultural is irrelevant. The net result is the same.
And here we agree. I mean, again, I don't agree with you that it's racial in terms of sort of genetic thing. I think there are many other factors. I mean, an example of Holland and Vietnam. Holland has, because of its richness and diet, has allowed its population to feed on much more protein, which created, the growth spurt.
No, that argument falls apart instantly because of Vietnamese calorie intake over the last 30 years, 40 years. Your argument doesn't fly. Because by that argument, you'd say that all young people in Vietnam today would be as tall as Dutch people. They're not. And, flip side, you have Dutch people who are noticeably taller than, say, Spanish people. Are you saying that Spanish people have had a calorie deficiency or nutrient or protein deficiency, and that's why the Spaniards are shorter than the ethnic Spanish, shorter than the ethnic Dutch? No, it's just a different class of people, a different group of people, a different subspecies of people.
All right, let's agree to disagree on that point. Although okay. I do agree with you 100% that it's a combination of various factors. The first question is the easy one.
Yeah, by the way, a quick parenthesis. See, everything that's complicated depends on a lot of nuance.
Sure.
And a lot of fiddling of the dials, just tiny little changes that can have a big impact, okay? So when you're talking about something as serious and complex and important as this, it's not just the one thing. If it were the one thing, then it would be easy to solve. If it's the one thing that you just twist the dial and it's fixed, then, and CRT and socialist programs like this, equity and the communism, they pushed affirmative action. If affirmative action were the issue, the problem would have been over. But these complex problems, they always have a lot of nuance. And so, yeah. So anyway, sorry about that. Go ahead.
You're absolutely right. And this what makes it so difficult to explain things to the masses, because as soon as more than one variable comes in and people's mind wanders off, that's why these simple,
exactly,
one variable explanations are so popular, because if this is one thing, don't worry about anything else. You don't have to.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's why people stupidly latch on to a single number. Like, for instance, they say GDP is the most important number to measure the health of an economy. Bullshit. And you look at, for instance, the Japanese economy, its GDP has been in the doldrums for 20 years. But the economy of Japan is exceedingly healthy. It just hasn't had a big growth spurt insofar as GDP, but that doesn't mean that its economy is in the doldrums, whereas the American economy, its economy is in the doldrums. It doesn't have any manufacturing base and whatnot. So yeah, I completely agree. This reducing everything to a single variable is just dumb. But anyway, I don't want to interrupting you.
I don't want to take much of my time because there's a list of people, so I'll shoot very quickly. You talk about the cycle of liberalism, but are we assuming that cycle kind of not ends, but kind of goes back to the same point where through social strife and economic downturn, the society reverts back to being poor and homogeneous?
Well, I don't know about that, but what I do know is that, the liberal period of world history, which I would argue started with the invention of the corporation in 1604 in Amsterdam, I think it's winding down. I don't think that it's going to end in our lifetimes. But, the notion, you see, how can I put it? History goes through different epochs. And these epochs, they rise and they dominate. Like the feudal system rose and became dominant for a period of time. The collapse of the Western Roman Empire led to a power vacuum that led to the rise in feudalism, right? And it had its beginning, its rise, its flowering, and then its collapse, right? Because every historical epoch sort of like rises and then falls. And so the notion that liberalism will rise and forever be, verdant is ridiculous. It's going to end eventually. And I think that we are witnessing the it's not the death rattle, but it's like liberalism has discovered it has a really big lump on its throat or something. And it's realizing that it's probably cancer. You see what I'm saying?
Sure.
That's where I think that we're at.
I mean, I'm in Canada. I see what's happening. I've suffered because of it, and I want to leave because of it. But I'm trying to figure out, so what's next? I mean, like, once,
Neo-feudalism.
But is it going to be a poor, homogenous society as before, which I kind of hard for me to imagine living in Toronto, which is extreme multicultural, or is it something else? Is there another point on that cycle?
I don't know. It's too early to tell, quite frankly. But it's going to be, it seems to me at this point, but I could be completely wrong or I could change my mind. Okay, so don't hold me to it. But it could be that it's a neo-feudalist society based on wealth and corporatism. But that's not clear yet. It could go in a different direction altogether. Okay. So we'll find out. Yeah.
Okay. Second quick question. You talk a lot about China and Russia and how they're not kind of poking the giant right now because they see the giant going through a major social upheaval. What would be the reaction of other powers who are homogeneous once the crisis, really gets underway? Once things fall apart, will they react? Will they intervene, or will they just live their own life without touching it anymore?
Well, look at Hungary, like a fairly homogenous country, right? And I think that they've made up their minds as a country. They're realizing, this liberalism shit, it's not going to last. And so the smart thing for us is just to hang back, right? And not become like a big target, okay? Because the EU hates them. The EU hates Hungary and Poland. But right now, what they want to do is punish Poland first because they figure Poland is a weaker member, okay? And they have more strings to pull in Poland than Hungary. And deal with Poland first and then with Hungary. But I think that Hungary is figuring, just hang back and be patient, and we'll muddle through and this liberalism shit will be dead. And, Europe isn't going to last. I mean, how can I put it? The death of Europe has been predicted so many times, right? It's sort of like fucking global warming at this point. But realistically, the way things are going in Europe, it's not going to last that fucking long, 5 years on the outside. Because the situation is deteriorating, and the neoliberal project of Europe is not something that the majority of the people of Europe are on board with, and so you really can't have a government that is so at loggerheads with its own people, not for long, unless you're really ready to break out the totalitarianism full force. But if that were to happen, then you're not going to have time to deal with countries like Hungary. You're not going to have the resources to deal with such countries. You're going to be dealing with your own internal problems and trying to hold the fort down. You know what I mean? So anyway, my thinking is that as liberalism starts to decay, the smart thing would be to go to places that are ethnically homogenous and where they have their shit organized and they can weather the storm, but they're not going to be like interfering in the collapse of liberalism, because liberalism is the dominant ideology of Western Europe and the United States and Oceania. So, nobody's going to be able to interfere with that. They're just going to have to stand back and watch it collapse. It's like a giant who's like really, really drunk, Do you try to prop up that giant? Fuck no. You try to get out of the way as he falls. you know.
And once he falls, what do you do?
Step over him and go and get a drink, I guess. I don't know. You know.
Okay. Third question, last. What do you think the aspect of the social division regarding the vaccination is going to play into that level of social differences? I mean, you can have a black guy and a white guy who, don't get along because, racism, but they still kind of agree on, let's say, being skeptical towards the vaccine. So,
well, yeah, the vaccine is a very specific issue. And my thinking is that as more people start to suffer side effects of the vaccine, I think that, we've seen it with other issues that, everybody's saying that the Wuhan lab leak is a conspiracy theory. You're a evil racist Nazi for saying that. And then the next day it's like, oh yeah, it probably came out of a lab, and everybody just turned the page instantly, right? It could be that all of a sudden the negative side effects of the vaccine hit a tipping point and the whole propaganda machine just flips a page. It flips a switch. And all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, these vaccines are bad. It could be as simple as that, which would really, really be despicable, right? But it could be like that. And my thinking is that the more they get hysterical about getting everybody vaccinated and vaccine passports, the more it denotes insecurity. See? Because if you're secure in a decision, you don't have the need to compel other people to follow your decision because you know it's the right one. The only time you feel compelled to, or the only time you feel that need to compel other people is when you know in your heart that you're wrong, that you've made the wrong choice. And so that's what I think is, we're going through that phase of denial that the leadership have yet to accept the fact that they fucked up. Because that's the only explanation as to why they're so adamant about getting everybody vaxxed and why they are now threatening people, really, with negative consequences if they don't get vaxxed. It's insecurity. See, when the polio vaccine became available in the 1950s, 52, I believe, they didn't threaten any parent if the parent didn't want to get the kid injected with a polio vaccine. There were a number of parents who lined up to get their kids vaccinated, and a number of parents who said, no, I'm going to wait and see if this is really safe. And no authority figure was like, we're going to compel everybody and we're going to have, Australian military officers pounding on people's door to make sure that they get the fucking vaccine. There was none of that shit. Yeah, because they were confident that it was the right decision, you see? So, yeah, I think that this vaccine and it might be really, really sudden that all of a sudden everybody's like, oh yeah, the vaccine is bad, don't take it. It could be like from one day to the next. Yeah.
But it seems right now that the whole vaccine question is very divisive in the society, where people agree on many things and then all of a sudden they fundamentally agree on that, or they fundamentally agree on other things and they agree on that and they get along. So there's this whole dimension of social.
Yeah, that's an expression of the pressure that the leadership is putting on people to get vaccinated. That kind of disagreement would not exist if there weren't this external pressure being applied. If this were look, if people said, hey, look, you take the vaccine and you don't have to worry about COVID and you won't spread it and everything will be copacetic. If you don't take the vaccine, well, you might get it, and die. Do you think that there would be like this kind of pressure? No, because people would be like, I'll take the vaccine because, I figure maybe I got a risk or not, and I'll take it. And other people would be like, nah, fuck it, I'm not going to take it. My risk factors are too low. And that'd be that, right? The fact that they're putting all this pressure is indicative of the fact that they know that it doesn't work.
What I mean is that, let's say you have someone, a friend or family member, who ridicules, forces you, calls you names for being skeptical about a vaccine. And 6 months from now or a year or whatever, it comes out that perhaps you were right. How do you react to someone who has been so obviously disrespectful towards you on that issue?
Well, you tell him, look, you fucking bitch. Even if he's a guy, you call him, look, you fucking bitch. Don't ever question my reasonable skepticism again. Tell him, yeah, because it's perfectly reasonable to be skeptical. It's perfectly reasonable. I mean, it's fucking insane not to be skeptical. That's my thinking.
Well, as you mentioned, 15 months ago would have been very unreasonable to even imagine things that we're talking about right now. Thank you very much, Coach. I'll let other people get in line. I've taken too much time. Thank you.
Take it easy, man. Hey, Linux, how's it going?
Pretty good, Coach. How are you? Can you hear me okay?
Pretty good. Yeah, I hear you fine, man. What's up?
Awesome. Well, first off, I want to take a moment to thank you for your content, man. It's truly some life-changing stuff in a positive way. So thank you for everything you do.
My pleasure, man. I'm glad I can help you out.
Yeah, definitely. Secondly, I want to give a shout out to both Robert and Chris because they covered a lot of the things that I wanted to ask you. So thanks, guys, for doing the heavy lifting and making it easy for me. But I want to sort of piggyback on a little bit of particularly what Robert was saying. I find myself as a 29-year-old man, a person who is just now starting to get to a point where I can establish resources. One of my favorite videos of yours is the days are short, but I'm sorry, the days are long, but the decades are short, where you sort of map out the trajectory or the ideal trajectory of a successful man, which I appreciate. So at 29, I'm just starting to round into form where I can start amassing resources here soon. I just got a new job that's in the field that I was preparing for, high paying job. Things are looking good. So that's great. More on the topic of this webinar, I've realized now that my worldview is opening up and my perspective is widening, I consume your content and I'm just becoming a little bit more aware. What I find is that my entire support system, my entire family, for the most part, my entire friend group, are those people who are completely oblivious to the realities of what's happening in the world right now. And as everyone has discussed so far, we're sort of approaching a dark time. It seems to be very inevitable, right? So as a young man who doesn't have resources yet and also doesn't have a support system, what practical advice could you give someone like me to ride out the coming storm? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, the first thing is that when you recognize, don't waste your energy trying to convince people. Okay. That's one of the things I realized when I was young, that I would realize something, I would understand a situation, and I try to convince other people, and they wouldn't want to be convinced. And I would waste a lot of energy on that.
Right.
Don't make my mistake. Okay. If somebody just doesn't buy what you're saying, and they're like, no, trust the science, the authorities have their best interests at heart, say, okay, fine, and just leave it at that. Don't argue. It's a waste of energy, waste of time.
Yeah, and I'm guilty of that for sure.
Yeah, and it happens because what happens is that, see, it's a perfectly natural human impulse to want to correct people's misappreciation of reality. You see that they're wrong and you love them. Of course you do. And so you want to correct them, not because you hate them, not because you want to say, haha, I told you so, but because you want their well-being, because it's a normal, natural, healthy thing that men especially want to not only appreciate objective reality, but pass along the objective reality that they are understanding to other people of their group or tribe or family. It's perfectly normal. Okay. And so what you have to do is very simple. Not argue, number one. Number two, figure out, what do I think is going to happen? And once I understand what I think is going to happen, how can I write it out with the resources that I have available to me? Okay. And you have to ask yourself, what do I think will happen to me specifically? Okay. Let me ask you, what city or state do you live in? Just in general.
Yeah. So Charleston, South Carolina. So leaning definitely conservative, which is cool, which I appreciate.
So what you want to do is, in South Carolina, you'll have no trouble at all, buying a gun, learning how to shoot. Because, by the way, to everybody, never buy a gun unless you're also going to take a class to learn how to shoot that gun. Okay. Because there's nothing more dangerous than somebody untrained with a firearm, right? So you get a gun, properly, licensed, from a sporting goods store, whatever the fuck. And you go down to a practice range and you hire an instructor for an hour or two or whatever. I mean, somebody who really knows, not like a buddy who maybe knows, right? And you get good at it. because if you figure that things are going to get heavy, then you want to be able to defend yourself and the people that you love and the property that you guys have. Okay, so that's the first step. Second step, you have to ask yourself, okay, where do I get shelter, food, and water long term? Okay, and you figure that out. First, defend yourself. Second, shelter and food and water long term. Okay, can I depend on the supply chains in my area, right? Or will there be food shortages, right? That kind of thing. The housing situation, the shelter situation. Okay, in South Carolina, you don't have hard winters, right?
Right.
I don't think so. I don't think
No,
you
no,
do.
fortunately, very mild.
Yeah, and so you're not really going to be worried about that. You got to be thinking to yourself, okay, how can I survive? And how can I survive assuming that the currency system collapses and that I can only barter things? Smart thing would be to learn how to hunt. And in your area, I don't know how many deer there are. Like, for instance, I spent a lot of time in New Hampshire. The place was lousy with deer. You could, Jesus, I mean, there was so many deer that sometimes we'd get the notice at my college that everybody who had a firearm, if they could help out with culling all the deer, because there were just so many. I mean,
Right.
And so I don't know how that situation is in South Carolina, whereby potentially you could feed yourself and your family by hunting, right?
I
Or
don't know for
fishing, something
certain,
like that.
but
Yeah.
I would assume it's probably average. I'm also new to the state, so
Okay.
I haven't figured out the lay of the land quite yet, but I would assume probably average.
Okay, then the next important thing, and this is really important, you want to build a network of people, local people that live around you that you can really depend on, that will have your back and that you will definitely have their back. Okay, because I mean, think about it. Suppose the currency system goes kaflooey, the dollar blows up, right, and the whole economy goes tits up, and there's there's no trucks coming in with food supplies, and all kinds of problems arise because of it. Yeah. So, dude, you're gonna have to depend on people around there, and you haven't been there long. So your job, apart from your actual job, is to meet as many people as possible in your local area and make friends with them. And try to find like-minded people. And you be subtle about it. And I bet at a shooting range, you'd find a lot of people who are on your same page. And so you make friends with them. And you tell them outright, there's nothing wrong with being honest. You're saying, look, I'm new to the state and I want to make friends. I want to make friends and have a lot of people because, things look fucking dicey, And
Yeah.
so I moved to this state because of my job, and it's a great job. But, I'm thinking to myself, if things go tits up, I really want to have like a circle of acquaintances. And that's one of the things about America that I really, really love, that people outside of America don't understand. People in America are friendly because they have this frontier mentality, and that somebody who shows up from far away needs help, and they're happy to give them that help. America is one of the friendliest countries you'll ever go to. I mean, really, because the only place more friendly than America, I'd say, is the Middle East. Because Arabs, man, you look at them for like 2 seconds and you got a friend for life. They are just the friendliest fucking people. No, I'm serious, right? And Americans are a close second to the Arabs, And so you want to make friends. That's what you want to do, okay? Yeah. And a lot of people say, oh, you should like prep and buy like 2 tons of food and shit like that. I've always been of the notion that, if you create like a giant hoard of goods, it just weighs you down and potentially makes you a target.
Yeah, absolutely.
My thinking has always been, travel light,
Yeah.
Only what you can carry on your motorcycle. That's my thinking. Just travel light.
Let me ask you this, Coach. I'm sorry to interject.
No.
So I think everything you said is spot on. One thing that I want to ask about is the shelter component of that. And you're totally accurate. Finding a place that's long term where I can sort of ride out the storm. Does that mean that I should take a strong consideration to the idea of purchasing property? Because I've been renting. I'm only 29. I've been renting apartments my whole life. Never owned property. But is that something that I should really seriously
Definitely
consider? Okay,
Definitely.
got
Well, especially because you take out a mortgage, right, at a
it.
fixed interest rate. not variable interest rate, okay? Fixed, and I'll explain why. If there is like really, really bad inflation, your debt will just collapse. You'll owe nothing, okay? Because with a fixed interest rate. But if you have a variable interest rate, what'll happen is that your mortgage payment will rise because of inflation, and you'll be fucked. You see? So you always want to take out a mortgage with a fixed interest rate. And yeah, that's the smart thing to do. And even if the fixed interest rate is a little bit higher or even a lot higher than the variable interest rate, and see, banks will try to tempt you to a variable interest rate with giving you like a teaser loan where the first year or two is the payments are a lot lower. Don't fall for that trap. Get a fixed interest rate, okay? Because a fixed interest rate, what will happen is that since it will not be readjusted for inflation, if there is heavy duty inflation, the value of the debt will go down, and so you will owe a lot less money. You'll make out really, really well. So that's my thing. Yeah, you're 29, buy your first property.
Yeah,
and if there wasn't this stupid eviction moratorium in the United States, at least, I tell you to buy a rental property too. If you got a job that pays you well enough, the smart thing would be to put together a little down payment for both a place for yourself and a rental property, and rent out the rental property and have the rent pay the mortgage.
Right.
And of course, when you do that, you make sure in the rental contract that the price of rental can be adjusted for inflation. See? I mean, you see what you're doing there. See, you're fucking over the bank by taking a fixed interest rate, and therefore it's going to be a fixed payment. And if inflation comes, you're not going to pay more. You're going to pay that same fixed amount, which will mean that relative to inflation, your payment is going to go down. But with your renter, you say that you'll readjust it every year based on inflation.
So you're coming out on top, regardless.
You're coming out on top. Exactly. Okay.
That's brilliant.
Now, but the thing is, you got to make sure that the eviction moratorium doesn't affect you, or that you can get around it or something. Okay.
Right.
So that's something that's really important. You got to be on top of that shit. Okay.
Yeah.
Because a lot of landlords have been broken because of it, which I think is despicable. Because most landlords are just middle class people who have like a rental property for their old age, and they got fucked out. They got fucked over. I mean, they got it, without lube, man. I mean, it was like a fucking, a cucumber wrapped in barbed wire up the ass with no lube. That's what they got, man. I think it's fucking despicable. Yeah, no, really despicable. But anyway, anything else on your mind, man?
Just a few quick points because I want to give everyone else a lot of time. I just want to share a quick point about the critical race theory piece. So, as a disclaimer, I am a Black man through and through.
Okay.
So the well-being of the Black community is something that is heavy on my heart and very important to me. So that's my disclaimer. With that being said, I think both Robert, Chris, and you hit some very, very key points in terms of are the disparities genetic? Are they cultural? I think the culture, my opinion, I have no qualifications to actually say that this is accurate or not, but my theory is that in a way they sort of both influence each other, perhaps equally, right? Because, my offsprings, my lineage, I would imagine that some of their genetics is going to be dependent upon the lifestyle that I'm living right now, right? So
well, no, I mean, like, okay, I'm listening to you right now, right? And there's something else that's going on insofar as American Blacks that even American Blacks don't really like talking about, and that's the issue of class.
Right.
And like, I'm listening to you now, right? And you tell me that you're Black, okay? I'll tell you right now, you probably have a lot more in common with me socially than with most Black people you know.
By far. By far.
And that's the thing. See, a lot of upper class Blacks, or educated Blacks, or however you want to call them, right? And I'm including you. A lot of times they get roped into a sense of solidarity, with Black people that they have socially nothing in common with. I mean, come on, Linux, right? I'm talking to you now, right? Are you telling me that you really have something in common with some fucking gangbanger who keeps saying axe and doesn't know how to conjugate the verb to be? I mean,
I
come
don't.
on.
I don't. And
Yeah, you
it
don't.
kind
Of
of fucks
course
with me a
not.
little bit. To be
Of
honest, it
course
fucks
it
with me a
fucks
bit.
with you because you're being manipulated, and I don't mean to be patronizing. I don't
No,
mean
it's
this.
okay.
I'm not saying this in a way that's patronizing you, but you're being manipulated, and a lot of other upper class, educated black people are being manipulated into a false sense of solidarity with people who are fucking trash. I mean, come on. I mean, dude, how many times have you been arrested? Can I ask you that? Okay.
None.
Yeah. Okay. You know, I'm Latino. Fucking Gonzalo, fucking Lira, man. I mean, that's as Latino as it gets. Okay.
Yeah.
Do you know how many times I've been arrested because I was like, selling weed in the barrio or some shit like that? Never.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
I
Yeah,
mean, dude, I'm a suburban kid, man. I don't know.
same.
Okay. And so, but the thing is, see, by this false sense of racial solidarity, you get roped into identifying with people that if you strip away the issue of race, you have absolutely nothing in common with them.
Mm.
And so my thinking is that what you should be doing is paying much more attention to the class issue than the race issue.
Yeah.
I think a lot of upscale, upper class, educated blacks, and I'm not talking like elite at the very
Yeah.
top. I'm talking about like
Right.
educated, upper middle class people
Yeah.
who are black. They get
Mhm.
roped into this false sense of racial solidarity with people who are fucking trash. I mean, come on, this George Floyd guy, right? And you follow the whole case, right? The guy was high as a fucking kite. The guy had a fucking heart attack because of all the goddamn fentanyl. Okay, and the Chauvin guy, you read about him. Chauvin was his friend. They knew each other. They worked together as bouncers in some fucking club. They knew each other for years. Okay.
Right.
And so the thought that Chauvin like deliberately killed him, fuck you. He saw that the guy was high as fuck, and did what was approved, and it's a disaster. And poor guy, he died. But do I think that Chauvin killed him? Fuck no. He died because of all the shit that he had taken. And it's a tragedy. But a lot of people who know better got roped into this, justice for George Floyd shit. And it seems to me, because it happens to me as a Latino, that a lot of lower class blacks rope in people like yourself who don't have anything in common with the lower class group, but get roped in because of this racial solidarity shit. Because I get roped into this shit all the time. Or let me phrase that. They try to rope me in. I'm like, fuck you, Cholo. It's your fucking problem, man. I mean, I'm not, I'm not going to deal with that shit.
Yeah.
Fuck no. All the illegal immigrants and all that crap. That's not my fucking problem because my parents weren't fucking illegal immigrants, man. I mean,
Right.
no, just because I'm Hispanic doesn't mean I'm down with that shit. Okay.
You know that the interesting
Go
thing,
ahead.
Coach, is you're spot on. In my personal experience, it's been a lot of the fucking super lefty white folks, the
Oh,
white people who
yeah.
are ringing me. That's who I hear it from the most, really. It's
And the
it's
funny
weird.
thing is that they're the most racist. Let me ask you something, hand to heart. Okay. How many times has some white liberal racially condescended to you?
All the time, every day of my life. I mean,
and how many times have the racist right-wing Republicans condescended to you?
surprisingly rarely,
Well, you don't even realize it. I guess it's your internalized racism, because I'm racially condescending to you right the fuck now. You haven't noticed it, but
Well, hey, I subscribe to a lot of your content, Coach. I know how you are. I think
See?
you're cool,
Look, you gotta watch out for those people who are trying to rope you in, and insofar as the white liberals that say everything is fucking racism, you only see what is already in your heart. That's always been my holy shit. I'm looking at myself in the mirror. I look like really fucking dark and fucking ooh, Anyway, but you only see what's already in your heart.
Yeah.
And a lot of these white liberals, right? They are projecting out into the world what they themselves perceive in their hearts, and it's kind of sad. But it would be sad if it weren't for the fact that it's so incredibly destructive.
Yeah.
And the relations between blacks and whites in the United States have taken just quantum leaps backwards because of what's happened over the last, 8-12 years. And I think that, frankly, I think that Obama has a lot of responsibility for that, because here was a guy who was extremely popular, but instead of like eliminating finally the issue of race, he put a lot of people into different positions of power that exploited race. And he himself has never gone out and given a critical race theory speech. But, you know, you don't judge somebody by their words, you judge them by their actions. And a lot of the people that he put in positions of power exploited this shit. And all the Democratic Party machine exploited this shit for electoral advantage. And I think it's really fucking despicable. But here we are, you know, and it's just sad. You know? Anyway, anything else on your mind, man?
That's it, Coach, man. I appreciate you again. Keep doing what you're doing, man. You're helping a lot of people.
Thank you. Thank you so much, man. Take it easy.
No problem. You too.
And tell us how it goes when you go to the shooting range. I'm kind of curious.
Oh, yeah, definitely. One of these Sundays, I'll update you guys.
Yeah, do it. Don't be dumb. You know, do it. You know, it's something that it's fucking fun. Okay. So, yeah. So, anyway, take it easy, man.
Hey, you too, Coach. Thanks.
Hey, Hannes, how's it going?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you fine. What's up? What's on your mind?
Yeah, one question about the vaccinations, because I'm living in Eastern Germany, and here in my state, we have like the lowest numbers or the lowest share of vaccinated people. And ironically, we also have the lowest incidence numbers right now. And since I think 1 or 2 months, we're not required anymore
Sorry to interrupt you. Look at the Iceland numbers. Not just you, Hannes, but everybody here. Look at the Iceland numbers and the Israeli numbers.
It skyrocketed, didn't it?
Yeah, in Iceland and Israel and Malta, the numbers of infected people, of like seriously ill people, are skyrocketing, and yet they have the highest percentage of vaccinated people. Yeah.
Yeah, and here it's completely the opposite.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is, we don't have to wear a mask anymore. If I go to the supermarket right now, I don't have to wear a mask. If I go to a restaurant, no mask. They also started again with some festivals and smaller concerts. So actually, right now, life is pretty normal here. And the incidence is like, for a few weeks, we had an incidence number of 0. So really nothing. And I think it was yesterday or the day before, I heard on the radio, because I was driving car, and they stated that some guys, don't remember the name, they proposed that maybe in autumn, maybe likely after the election for the federal government in September, the plan that the normal tests you have, so not the PCR test, but like the everyday test, that they want to make them cost money, because right now you can get, I think, 2 of them free per week. And you need them also to go to the supermarket, because in the last lockdown, it was like, if you, let's say you go to the hairdresser, you need a test that you are not, what is it? That you don't have COVID. Yeah. In the supermarket, you didn't need it. And now they want to do this like with unvaccinated people, that you need a test like every time you go to the fucking supermarket. And like the test would cost a few bucks, maybe $10, maybe 20. Maybe they also say that you need a PCR test, which costs like here, I think, about 80 euros. So it would be expensive to go to the supermarket then.
That's the point. They're trying to force people, to coerce people by these passive aggressive means to get vaccinated. Yeah, exactly.
And my question is like, how far do you think they can push the people? Because I think like maybe 20, 30, 40% of the population, they don't want to get vaccinated. And I think this is like really a large number of people. And if you say to them, okay, you have to have an expensive test if you just go to the supermarket, I think this is like, I mean, if this is not a reason to go on a demonstration and take it out to the streets, what is? So I think that even in Germany, it could lead to a lot of demonstrations. So we already have them. Not as big as in France, because we're Germans and not French. But yeah.
Well, my thinking is that in Germany, I keep abreast a little bit of the situation there. My good friend Red Pill Germany on YouTube. You should check out his channel. He's great. He's a German, and he releases content in English about Germany. Anyway, my thinking is the problem with Germans as a people, and do recall that I'm 3/8 German, right? My maternal grandmother was German, and my other grandmother was half German. And they are a very compliant people, and a lot of times to their detriment, that they decide to follow the rules and do what they're told, and a lot of times they wind up going off a cliff. and instead of using a little bit of judgment. And so my fear is that the Germans are just going to do as they're told, and then later there'll be a lot of tears. My thinking is that, look, the vaccine issue, you see, we want to know if it's safe or not. So it's an issue of time. You want to avoid taking it for as long as possible to see if there are really serious adverse effects, because it could be that it's not that bad. Yeah, but
yeah, I personally think
it is. Go ahead.
It is.
What? Hello, Hannes? I lost you there. Hello. Okay, I'll bring in Amado and Hannes. I'll keep you on, and I've completed the questioning with Amado, I'll bring you back on. But fix your audio. Something happened there. Amado, how's it going? You there?
Dangerous.
Oh, Hannes, are you back? Hello. Okay, Amado, are you there, or is it me? Hello.
Hey, Coach, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. What's up? What's on your mind?
Okay, so yeah, I was actually really excited that you had this topic because I remember 2 weeks ago you actually brought the fact of how a racially diverse society can't work, and so it's interesting that you made this. And I think, obviously, I think you would know about this, especially seeing that you're a Latino, I'm Latino, so Latin America is pretty diverse. So the first question is just a simple one. Do you think that a racially homogenous society, kind of like China, is better?
Is it better? No, because it has a lot of things that are negative. Okay, just because it's racially homogenous doesn't mean it's automatically good. Like I discussed earlier, one of the problems with Chinese education system and society in general, Chinese society, is that it is extremely compliant and very anti-individualistic, pro-collective. And this goes back because during the 13th century, 13th, 14th century, it was invaded by the Mongols, who just totally decimated it. And it became like it was a trauma that they've never gotten over. And so they have that particular issue. And so just because they're racially homogenous doesn't mean that they would be more successful than racially, like a multicultural society. But multiculturalism in and of itself is not, it's not a pro. In fact, it's a con. Like Sukarno, the first leader of Indonesia. Sukarno at first came in with the notion that a multicultural society like Indonesia would be great. But from bitter experience, he realized that in a multicultural society, you cannot have a democracy. You have to have a strong authoritarian leadership, because a multicultural society will inevitably fragment into the various ethnic groups, and they will battle each other.
Do you think it's always the case that they have to have strong leadership?
Strong leadership so that to balance out all these various ethnic groups? Yeah, it seems so.
Okay.
And I don't think that the problem with a strong leader, quote unquote, is that you were talking about a dictator. And see, you could have a really good dictator like Sukarno, like Pinochet, or you could have a really bad dictator like Stroessner.
Or Trujillo.
Like, Trujillo, Somoza. Okay, I mean, so you can have it either way. And you'll never know beforehand. You'll only know after the fact. Okay? And so that's the problem with a strong leader, a strong man, a dictator, a caudillo, call him what you will. But that's the only way to effectively rule a multicultural society. And so the idea is that perhaps it's better not to have a multicultural society, to have a racially homogenous society. A racially, culturally homogenous society. By the way, I think that one of the big problems that we've had recently is we have lost the common culture, because you got to keep in mind, when I was growing up in the 70s, there were only 3 national channels, ABC, CBS, and NBC, and a couple of local channels that showed just reruns of other shows from the main broadcast networks, right? And everybody would watch the same movies, and everybody would watch Walter Cronkite at the same time. It was culturally a lot more homogenous. But with the advent of cable television first, and then with the internet, with video games, and then with all the streaming services and all the rest of it, we have lost that cultural homogeneity. We don't have a common culture. I hear sometimes, like gamers talking about games and shit. And I'm, what the fuck are you talking about? Because I'm not a gamer.
Do you think America is just too big? Like it's just become smaller just to make it easier?
Probably.
Okay.
But when you make it smaller, that is, you break it up into smaller pieces, then you lose the economies of scale that make America so efficient. Okay. And so there are trade-offs. I look, I know that we're headed for a crash, but the problem is that I don't even know how the crash is going to look like, let alone what's going to be on the other side. Okay. Because basically that's the answer to a lot of people have been wondering, and they've asked me in a fairly indirect way, what is going to happen after the crash? I don't even know how the crash is going to look like, let alone what's going to happen after. All I know it's going to be bad. And all I know is that the life of 2019 will never come back. Never. That life is gone forever. And that easy traveling anywhere in the globe and all the rest of it, it's gone forever. The totalitarianism is going to rise more and more. And it's going to rise because of insecurity, and it's on the part of the leadership, and a realization that there's nobody there to stop them. Okay.
Is the crash going to be caused by the war you spoke on 2 weeks ago, or it's just going to happen regardless?
Well, I think it's going to happen regardless, but I do think I'm positive that there's going to be a war. I'm so positive. They're itching for it. That's the thing. And both sides, by the way, the Chinese and the Americans, they're just itching for it in a way that was not the case during the Cold War. I mean, I remember I lived through the Cold War. The Russians and the Americans were not looking forward to a war. They didn't want one, okay? And they went out of their way to make sure that they didn't have a war. But today, the Americans and the Chinese, they just want it. So they can taste it. They think that both sides think that a war would solve a lot of their domestic problems. Okay? So that's the problem. That's go ahead.
A really interesting point that you brought up during the podcast is something that I noticed too. So when you're talking about critical race theory and kind of I think the word you talked about where some people feel ashamed or guilty of their success. Yeah. So like a lot of times, say the white guy on Park Avenue, he'll point at the white guy on the Appalachian Mountain and say, "Oh no, he's the problem."
Yeah.
And I do see that a lot. I do see, or it's kind of similar to how in the office place, maybe like one of the co-owners or the vice whatever, he'll actually be doing things to women behind closed doors, but he likes to, kind of white knight in the office place.
Sure.
Where does that come from? I do notice that why do they think that rich liberal white people are on their side and they like to shit on maybe poor white people? Like, where'd that come from?
Oh, it's a natural impulse from the impulse to gossip. Okay. Hang on a second. Hang on. I'll answer your question, but let me go and turn on the lights. Hang on.
Sure.
Yeah, much better, much better. No, what's going on is real simple. See, we have the urge to gossip, okay? Mm-hmm. And it's in gossip that we exchange information, and it's very important to gossip, okay? Because we're social animals, and we always want to know where we stand relative to the other, animals in our tribe or pack or whatever, right? They're human beings, of course. And so what happens is that we have this urge to gossip, and it's very normal to sort of like ally ourselves against a third party because we feel more secure. Okay, and so suppose this. Suppose you're a black guy and I'm a white liberal, right?
Okay.
And I feel very insecure because, you know, I'm doing real well and you're not doing so well. Suppose I live on Fifth Avenue and you live in fucking the Bronx or whatever the fuck, right? And so, like, I'm feeling insecure. So what do? I say, oh yeah, you know, it's the white guys. It's those white guys in Appalachia. They're the racists. Those white supremacists. They're the ones that keep you down. And you listen to my bullshit, but you're not thinking this guy's bullshitting me. You're figuring, yeah, you know, I mean, like, I got a shitty life, you know, it can't be my fault. It's got to be racism. Oh, yeah, these Appalachian fuckers. Yeah, they're the white supremacists in Appalachia. Yeah, and so you and I all of a sudden are in agreement. And when you agree with somebody, you naturally develop a closer bond. And more to the point, we both feel more relaxed with one another. And me especially, that I was feeling very insecure, thinking that I have a disproportionate amount of luck. Now that I'm convincing you that I'm on your side, I feel more safe and secure. I don't feel so guilty. All I have to do is just point to that guy in Appalachia who hasn't done fucking shit, of course, you see? And that's what's going on. And it's a natural thing of human beings.
Why would I'm sorry about that.
It's the urge to scapegoat, I said. Go ahead.
Yes, sorry about that. Well, why would, I mean, it may sound obvious, well, why would minorities go for it? I mean, I mean, the white guy who works at the factory, he's just trying to feed his family at night. I mean, if you really want to talk about racism, talk about the guy who didn't give you the job. Why do you love him so much, you know?
Well, see, I mean, right there, you got it. Minorities. Why are minorities so foolish to fall for this? See, yes. Individuals are smart. People are stupid. Simple as that, you know? It's not more complicated. You talk to a guy one-on-one, like you and I are talking right now, right?
Yep.
And you're probably going to be able to convince him, or at least have him acknowledge your point of view. Not necessarily convince him, but at least he'll understand your point of view. And by understanding your point of view, he might be able to internalize and figure, oh, you know, maybe it's more like this. Maybe it's more nuanced, right? But you're talking to 3 people or more, fuck nuance. Nuance goes out the window. People's collective IQ points goes down, okay, the more people are around, okay? Look at a crowd of people. I mean, look at a riot, for instance. What's a riot? It's a crowd of people that they go berserk. You grab any one of those people who are rioting, and, you know, you say, do you want to riot? They probably say, no, I don't really want to riot, but everybody else is rioting, so, you know, I mean, that's the way people are, okay? I got to remember, you know, individuals are smart. People are stupid. Yeah. Anything else on your mind, Amado?
Yeah, just last thing. I remember, like I said, 2 episodes ago, someone asked you, what should they do in terms of a collapse? And maybe you're being funny, but you said, I think you said learn Spanish, learn Russian. Like, why'd you recommend
you know, the languages to learn. Yeah, the best languages to learn are English, Spanish, Chinese, and Russian. Yeah.
Were you serious about that?
Yeah, sure. You can speak with everybody if you know those 4 languages. See? Because everybody on the face of the planet knows one of those 4 languages.
What were they?
Yeah, think about it. Okay, you know English, Spanish, Chinese, and Russian. Okay, go to China, everybody talks Chinese. That's 1.4 billion. Go to Russia, everybody in Russia, Belarus, the Baltics, you know, Ukraine, lots of people in Turkey, Georgia. You're talking right there, 300 million people. Okay, that's 1.7 million. You know, Latin America with Spanish, you can talk to everybody there. That's what? How many people in Latin America? 500 million? Okay. And yeah, you know, Brazilians, they don't speak Spanish, but Portuguese is close enough to Spanish that you can sort of like muddle through, right?
That's right.
English, you can talk to everybody in North America. You can talk to everybody in the UK. You can talk to most everybody in Western Europe, certainly everybody in Germany, you know. And
half the people in West Africa.
Yeah. So you start adding up the numbers, and yeah, those 4 languages, you got the whole world covered. But of course, they're not easy languages to learn, especially Chinese and Russian if you only speak English and Spanish.
Right, well, as always, thank you, Coach.
No, my pleasure, man. Take it easy. Hey, Hannes, how's it going?
Yeah, I don't know what happened. Suddenly my webcam just stopped working. Where was I? I think I was talking about the vaccine. Yeah. From my personal experience of people I know who have a vaccine in various age groups, I mean, nothing bad happened to them. Maybe yet. So maybe 1 year later, we will be much smarter about it. The thing for me is, I want to have children, and I don't know what this vaccine could potentially do if I have offspring. That's like my biggest fear, because if let's say in 5 or 10 years I have a child and it gets maybe some disability, and then I'm fucked.
Well, yeah, it's more likely not that your child would get a disability, but rather that you wouldn't be able to have a child. Okay.
Yeah, this would be the worst case. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Because actually, it's more likely that your reproductive organs would be damaged and your sperm would not work, rather than your sperm would have some mutation that would bring about something horrible to your children. Okay, that's more likely. But be that as it may, look, I would never. I mean, this is what I plan on doing. I'm not going to be taking any vaccine. Simple as that, because I have similar concerns. I want to have more kids, and so no, and it's simple as that. And I would not have children with, or I would not have a relationship with a woman who has been vaccinated, because I would think that relationship has no future. Because if a woman can't have children, there's no future in the relationship. It's just a fuck buddy, and that's it.
What I see is that there are a lot of women who are vaccinated actually, and I'm 25.
Then I'd have to find the ones who aren't.
Yeah, sure. But I just found it very interesting that so many young people get a vaccination, because I mean they are not
because they're dumb.
By COVID, and it's just like the herd mentality that pushes them to do this without any reason for it. I mean, if I would be 70 years old, I would take a vaccine because COVID then is really dangerous for me. But I'm 25. I'm fairly fit. I'm almost never sick. I don't fear this virus. If I get it, I get it. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I completely agree with you. But young people today are they have been raised to be extremely compliant and afraid of life, because, all this helicopter parenting, all of this, participation trophies and all this bullshit, all this coddling of children. And always putting the helmet on the kid when he goes on his bicycle and shit like that. You raised timid children. That's what you have. You have very, very timid children who aren't going to do fucking shit. They're too chicken shit to do anything. It's a disaster. I mean, anybody can see that it's a disaster. But that's the way things are. And so that's why all these young people are immediately getting the vaccine. And they're being very compliant and doing exactly what the authorities want, because they have been raised by their parents to be that way. See? Because they haven't been taught to be independent. Okay? Their parents drove them everywhere. See? When I was growing up, I wanted to go someplace, I just hopped on my bike and went. But kids today, no, that's not how it is. And it's a tragedy, but that's life.
Yeah, it's certainly true.
And so insofar as women are concerned, also women are naturally more compliant, and so you're going to find a lot more of them who are taking the vaccine just to comply, just to fit in. Okay.
Yeah.
And so your task will be to find a woman who has not taken the vaccine, who has deliberately said, no, this is dangerous, and I'll see what happens. And if later down the line it's proven to be not dangerous and there is some benefit to it, okay, then I'll take it. But right now there is no such proof. And so
totally agree.
That's my thinking. Yeah.
Yep.
Hope this helps.
Yeah. Thank you very much, and have a nice evening.
No problem. Thank you. Take it easy.
Yep,
hey,
bye.
Silvio.
Hey, how's it going, Coach? Can you hear me?
Good. Yeah, I hear you fine. What's on your mind, man?
Good. Nothing much. So I kind of just wanted to piggyback off the whole kind of like division here in the United States. I'm from Jersey, I just want to let you know. So
Jersey, represent.
Yeah. Actually, I'm a town away from Newark. I know you mentioned that in the podcast about like the whole like race riots and stuff like that. So I agree with everything you said in that webinar. Just put that on there.
So anyway, what's on your mind, man?
Yeah. So I've been kind of like reading the tea leaves lately, and I've noticed. I would say maybe like to bring it back, the whole. I kind of see that dark hour here. The is pretty much like all right. Sorry about that. Kind of thinking through it. That it's everything just fell off my mind.
That's okay.
Yeah, apologize. I've been watching you for a while now, so yeah, and it's like
you've been waiting for a while, and it happens. It happens.
Yeah, okay? Yeah. So the whole thing with the vaccine, I don't think necessarily it was kind of like a population control. I think it's more to, I think it's more so to weed out the ones that are not compliant, that kind of like have like a brain for themselves. So I think that's when the whole like, because now that they're pushing this Delta variant, instilling more fear in the population and stuff, I think that's kind of like, that's going to be like the needle on the camel's back that really like just breaks everything up. If that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, I look, I don't know when people are going to wake up that this is all bullshit, but it feels like bullshit, right? And they got the Delta variant, and they got like on deck, they've got Lambda variant and then the Epsilon variant. And then they're going to start picking the names based on like the stars in the sky because there aren't enough letters in the Greek alphabet. It's all bullshit, okay, as far as I'm concerned. Yeah. It's just scaremongering, and it just serves no useful purpose. And I think that if you keep on scaring people enough times, they get inured to it and they just ignore it. And if you keep annoying them after they've decided to ignore you, then they hit you. Right. So that's the way people are, you know? Right. So I'm hoping that happens quicker than sooner rather than later, but we'll have to see.
Yeah, definitely. And like, and I was seeing on the news now about it's like 49.8% of the U.S. population has been vaccinated. And the one thing that I want to bring up too, because obviously we've seen both sides, like left and right, and I feel like the kind of like the Republican conservative side are starting to bend their knees to the left.
They're such bitches. Yeah, they're such bitches. They believe in nothing. Right. You know, the Republican Party, man, if you ever call me a Republican, man, I'm going to slap you, okay? Yeah. Because those fuckers, they're pussy-ass bitches. They've got no principle, no courage, nothing. They see things that are just egregious violations of people's rights, horrible policies, and they're like fucking, oh, man. I so despise them.
And I'll be honest with you, like last year when the whole like elections stuff was going on, like I fell victim to that completely. Like I was just like, oh, pro-Trump, this, that, everything. But then once I started kind of like doing my own research and stuff like that, then I was like, I mean, look, at the end of the day, everybody just cares about themselves and they have their agenda and the other side's agenda. So it's like, figure out the government's not there for you.
No, it's not. No, it's not. So anyway, Silvio, great talking to you, man. Anything else on your mind?
Oh yeah, one thing I want to bring up. Oh, sure. I liked your video on the organizing your time. I bought my agenda about a month ago, so I've been doing that, and it's been helping out a lot.
Really good. Yeah, good to know.
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, because that little simple trick of just writing shit down, it can really help.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
So anyway, Silvio, take care. Great talking to you.
All right, we'll speak soon.
I hope so. Bye-bye. Hey, Jonathan, how's it going?
I'm great. How are you, Coach?
I'm doing fine. What's on your mind, man?
That's good. Well, you made me buy a motorcycle. I bought a motorcycle because of you and Neil Peart. I decided just to go for it, hop on the train.
What did you buy?
I bought a 1977 Honda CB550, and it has like all the chrome.
That's a great bike. How much did you pay for it?
Oh, all right. You're going to pop a chubby for this one. $100.
Oh, wow.
And it was a buddy of mine. So I asked him a while back, I said, hey, you still have that bike? And he said, yeah, my wife wants me to get rid of it. So I gave him $100. He brought it over here, and I have all the carburetor parts I have to put on it. I put a lower profile seat. So I'm like buying parts here and there. But my goal was to have it. Oh, what'd you say?
It's running, right?
Yeah, it's ran before, and I'm even like changing out some of the electrical stuff too, just in case. But it should run either way. I'm pretty snazzy with engines.
You're like riding it at this time.
No, not yet.
Oh, okay. When do you
it's
think
parked in the shed?
Oh, yeah, but you gotta get it running. That's the first thing. Get it. Yeah, because like fooling around with a engine. The problem with that is a lot of times you can wind up like having it there forever and not actually getting it running. And you want to get it running and get on the bike and ride around. So that should be your priority, to actually get it running and going. Yeah.
That's the goal. September 15th is when I had the goal, and I've had it for about 5 months. So I should have all the parts to do it. But if I don't have it running after September, I'll sell it. But I'm kind of resisting to push that line even further.
No, you got to get it like done and running. That's the whole point. Because especially now with the summer, you want to get as much mileage as you can during the summer, because later on in the winter, forget it. I don't know where you're living, if the weather in the winter is motorcycle riding weather or not.
Florida.
Okay, so yeah,
it's always great.
It's always great,
except for the rain. Except for the rain.
So what's on your mind, man?
Yeah, so very crucial question. I have, this will like set the course for your channel. When are you gonna do that Rush live stream you talked about a few months ago? Like,
I did the Rush live stream.
No, you said you were gonna listen to all the albums.
Oh no, that would be like 20 hours or some shit like that. No, I was just fooling around. No, and that's way too much of a commitment in terms of time, and I think it would be insane, But no, it would be a lot of fun, but it's just a lot of work and a lot of hours. That's the bottom line issue. It's not so much the work, because it would be fun to be talking about the albums, but like, dude, listening to 20 studio albums, and average length is say 50 minutes. Dude, you're talking about 1,000 minutes of music. That's offhand, that would be, dude, 16 hours of music, just the music. That would be a long goddamn stream, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, you get to hear Geddy Lee's voice that whole entire time.
Yeah.
Even though I love this, I really like Neil Peart. But anyways, the second question is, you said that there might be another lockdown. And now, since I'm in Florida, I'm a whole lot freer, but I don't trust DeSantis one bit. I still kind of flip-floppy on the guy.
Yeah.
And I don't trust any politicians in general.
There's something about DeSantis that doesn't really convince me. He says all the right things, but somehow I feel that he's insincere somehow. And the fact that he's a closeted gay guy, it bothers me,
No, it's true.
Because he is. Don't give me any bullshit that he's straight. He's not. He's clearly closeted. Okay, and that just, I don't know. But anyway, it was really interesting, because I think that they were going to lock down, and they must have done a couple of trial balloons and some like test polling or something, and they backed off that idea, because all of a sudden everybody was saying, no, there isn't going to be any big lockdown, nationwide lockdown. But I get the vibe that they were going to, and they backed off. Okay. But not because cooler heads prevailed, but because they tested it and it didn't fly. Because I don't think that people in the United States would go for another full-on lockdown. You tell me.
If that were to happen, I already know a lot of people, and I'm not going, hypothetically, I would say myself as well, that are so pissed off they basically run out the door with certain items and do certain things. And a lot of people are trained very well.
I think that nobody would. A full-on lockdown. I think that somebody realized that this was a horrible idea, because like a lot of people were saying that was the word coming down. Okay, Posobiec. I don't know how to pronounce his name. Posobiec. He said so, that he had some source that they were going to do a big speech, and I was like, okay, it seems legit. But But yeah, all of a sudden, Fauci and all these fucking people are like, no, definitely no more lockdowns and something like that. I don't know. I don't trust any motherfucker. Look, I'm happy to be living in Ukraine where nobody hassles me. You know,
That's nice.
Nobody gives a fuck. Okay, and that's why you want to be an expat in a poor country, because in a poor country nobody hassles you. In a poor country, life is cheap. I mean, living expenses are cheap, right? And nobody hassles you, and you have all the freedom you can want. Okay, it's in the developed countries, in the rich countries, that's where they try to control you because they're trying to siphon off money from you. They just want their piece of you. So anyway, Jonathan, anything else on your mind?
No, it's about Dutch citizenship. What do you think about that? I'm part Dutch, but I have to do like the whole genealogy crap.
Yeah.
Is there any way to where I can do that?
Sure. Just look up immigration lawyers Holland or Netherlands.
Okay.
And yeah, that would be the way to go. And there are lots of immigration lawyers that can help you out in the Netherlands. They all speak English, and you can just send them a query letter via email and say, look, this is my situation. I'm a U.S. citizen with a Dutch lineage, and I want to go about getting a Dutch passport, and they'll help you out. It's pretty straightforward and shouldn't be a problem. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, it's either there or Africa, and currently I can't get a COVID passport because I haven't taken the vaccine. So
yeah, I know my position on that, man. Anyway, Jonathan, thanks for being on. It was a real pleasure. Take it easy.
Of course. Thanks, Coach.
Okay, boys and girls, that's the end of this broadcast. Yeah, because I've gone like a little over 3 hours and I'm a little bit fried. And so thanks so much. And I hope you enjoyed this broadcast, and I will catch you next time.